Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 521. Scarred Earth. For several minutes, everyone was pressed in their seats as the bus accelerated and left Delta and its floating islands behind. It seemed that Al-Zalsar has also made some modifications to the bus pertaining to its speed. The mountain peaks below flew by as they traveled north. Seth was looking out the window when a soft hand grasped his own. "Mina," he whispered, seeing his girlfriend intertwining her fingers with his and grabbing his hand tightly. She nervously looked out the window. Although she tried to hide her fear, her ears and tail gave it away. Could it be that Mina had fear of flying? It wasn't often that Mina showed a weakness to him, and her trying to hide it made it even more endearing. He grasped her hand tightly in return and looked her in the eyes to reassure her. They didn't talk, but he could feel her become less tense beside him. After a while, it became boring to watch the mountains and people started to have idle talk. Say, Seth, how come you have such a peculiar vehicle? It doesn't seem like something you would have bought in Krna. Don't tell me you can also make something like this. Lena approached him when their flight stabilized. Oh, this? This is the work of our finest dwarven blacksmiths and our affiliated enchanter. Seth answered her question without committing to anything. Despite the incident of destroying several peaks, the princess knew little about Al-Zalsar and her power. Seth didn't feel like telling the princess information about the terribly strong person backing them. The fewer people knew about the true power behind Mina's Mar, the better. Fantastic. I didn't expect that there would already be people with such skills in Delta. It's good to know that you are developing so quickly, she said with a bright smile. Seth had not expected her to react so positively. He almost felt a little bad for having secrets. Up to now, all interactions with the princess normally ended in mutual benefit or with him gaining something. He had to admit that his distrust seemed unwarranted. Still, it didn't feel right to just spit out his secrets to her. You are just placating me. The sky of Krna is full of flying vessels. This should be nothing in your eyes. Well, that's true, but something this fast and well armored also isn't common. Even I don't have something like this here, she admitted with a smile. It's eating more than enough magic crystal in exchange for its speed, the blacksmith answered self-deprecatingly. They spent some time this way, talking about nothing really. Others did the same. After all, there was nothing else to do for now. Not many monsters were able to keep up with the bus, speeding through the sky. To everyone's surprise, even Seth's, those that could keep up were almost immediately taken down by Ceres. It was almost creepy when the bird set off and burned creatures out of the sky with a burst of gleeful laughter. At first, everyone would stare at Seth with a questioning stare, but what was he supposed to do? He had taken some time to get an idea about Ceres's skills, but outside of actual combat, he didn't really have a way to assess the full extent. Fortunately, they got used to it after some time and Seth was spared from their dumbfounded looks. Seth also got the chance for some private talk with Yvette. Of course, it was about the dragon scales. He couldn't help but blame her a little to get herself into danger while holding on to something so precious. I only accepted because Lena said that we are traveling with you. Isn't this your quest to get those things cleansed? I thought it might even come in handy if I was already there with the dragon scales when you finish the quest, she argued with a hushed voice. Though unwilling, Seth couldn't help but acknowledge her logic. It was the best course of action for her, as she could stay on good terms with him and Lena. If she wanted to grow the religion of Samhatch, she couldn't only rely on Mina's march. When everyone got a little hungry after several hours of flight, Bulko brought out the rations Link had prepared for them. Wow, this is really delicious. Lena complimented when she tasted the bronze bird dishes the gourmet hunter had made for their journey. Were these prepared by the head chef of the Turquoise Anvil? She asked excitedly. You know about Link? Of course, I have been visiting the restaurant regularly, she bragged. I hate to interrupt your talk, but what is that over there? Lixis commented. She was pointing out the window to the right. Currently, they had left the central mountain range and flew along the edge over the foothills. The quarter elf was pointing at a vast stretch of land covered in dark clouds. With a clean cut, a grey and dead wasteland without any visible plant life began below the blanket of dirty, sick-looking clouds. Especially Lena's face fell when she saw this. Is that Gamma? Seth asked speechlessly after checking his map. He could see Lena balling her fist tightly. Does this something have to do with Arjit Noor? Mina asked seriously. She was accompanying the princess when they dealt with the undead empire, so she was the first to question the connection when she heard that they were close to Gamma. Lena let out a long sigh. Yeah, I heard about this. It's a strategy of the undead empire called Scarred Earth. They terraform their territory into a land of dead that does not allow for any life. This way they demotivate others from trying to reconquer the land. She explained with a serious expression. Could this be the reason your scouts didn't come back? Yvette asked, but Lena shook her head. This magic doesn't have any immediate effect on players and barely any on someone at the level of the scouts. Also, we still have a truce with them, they wouldn't attack people from Krina. Still. This isn't what you expected they would do after making a truce. Seth concluded from her expression. The princess had obviously not thought that Arjit Noor would go as far as to use the Scarred Earth. Maybe there is a special reason we don't know. The undead usually aren't this aggressive in their approach. There has to be a reason why they created such a foothold on Earth, the princess deliberated. If there was, they didn't know it. Should we do something about it? The cloaked figure asked the princess, but Lena shook her head. It's not our mission right now. But I will ask Arjit Noor for an explanation when we are back in Delta. Seth didn't worry too much. His heart sank at first when they saw the wasteland, but in the end, he realized that this was not necessarily a problem. Gamma had long been evacuated with the help of Krina, and the people had suffered a lot more under the Zarkists than from the undead. Did his heart ache because Earth kept changing under these foreign influences? Sure, a little. But then why would he be more upset about the undead empire, than about the giant forest that almost killed him, or the districts that were left in ruins? Earth was changing, probably a lot more than he himself knew about. With the age of gods, this would probably only become worse. He could only accept that. It wasn't all bad, he could look forward to the first chosen of a holy god that would set out to vanquish the undead for easy experience. The sight of the devastated land did not accompany them for too long, but the impact stayed. The bus had fallen silent as everyone had their own thoughts about what they had just seen. Chapter 522. Nukkalavi. The shuttle had crossed roughly half their path to the Northern Ocean when it became night. We should land for the time being and get some rest, Seth suggested. Unfortunately, Seth had not thought of a golem pilot or sleeping in the bus. Mike was getting tired after piloting for a whole day, and the others also didn't look fresh anymore. The system came with a lot of quality of life features that allowed one to even stay awake for a long time without major consequences. Magic potions for stamina that worked similar to energy drinks also existed, but in the end, nothing could really substitute sleep. If his memory didn't betray him, they had almost passed the northern mountains and were getting close to the Sigma Sea. It was an inland sea nestled in a gap of the northern mountain range and Sigma district's door to the continent. According to Princess Lena, this was the range where she lost contact with her scout teams. They decided to land and get some sleep before they reached the potential danger zone in preparation for whatever might be to come. Mike landed the shuttle on a small plateau where they could set up camp. In addition to the security matter that the priests like Yvette, Bulko, and Finn were able to set up, Seth and the figure that accompanied the princess also brought out portable wards. In this case, the ones the blacksmith brought out were prepared by Evie, Myanmar's immortal witch. They were able to subconsciously deter monsters. Those of the cloaked figure were military-grade products from Krina. They erected a barrier to block attacks and even the cold mountain winds. They also had a function of detecting monsters, Lena explained. We should still make guard shifts, the cloaked figure mentioned after they set up tents. We can leave that to Ceres, right, Ceres? Seth asked the birdbot. Oh, yes. I will burn anything that comes near. It cried with blazing eyes. Seth began to understand why Ceres was enough of a menace for Forge Brown to subjugate it. If this was its temper after spending several millennia locked into a spear, what kind of maniac would it have been during its lifetime? I will also send out some recorder golems to scout and surveil the vicinity, Seth added, and released a bunch of small round recorder golems that guys, they heard Lixus as insecurely. It didn't sound like she had good news. When had that elf become a harbinger of doom? What is that? She finished her question when the group came closer. She pointed at something massive walking past at the foot of the plateau, maybe 30 m below them. The waning light of the day showed the figure of a rider and his horse. Just that they were at least triple the size of a normal horse and human rider. But this was only what those without night vision saw. For people like Seth, it was a completely different picture. Pale sinews and powerful muscles were visible as a pulsating mass with black blood coursing through yellow veins. In the twilight of dusk, he saw a skinless creature. A human torso joined to the back of a demonic horse with arms so long they reached the ground. A big eye glowed menacingly in the dark and a toxic vapor flowed from the horse head's fanged maw. What little, crippled vegetation had survived in these mountains was shriveling up where the beast had passed by. Even if not the whole group was able to see this, all of them could feel the thick aura of malice that surrounded the thing. Oh, no. It's a Nukkalavi! Finn exclaimed in terror. What? Was the group's general reaction. Aerm. The fairy struggled to come up with an explanation. It's like a fairy of the ocean or a demon. It's a being of pure evil. But it should stay close to the ocean. What is it doing here in the mountains? She answered agitatedly. The fairy was frantically flying around. Seth couldn't remember ever seeing Finn this panicked. Was this thing such a big deal? Calm down, Finn. It doesn't seem like it has noticed us. The bard tried to soothe the fairy. Right, there is no need to take a risk and fight this, if you don't want to, Finn. Mina joined him with obvious worry for the fairy. Why, you are right. If it just walks past, everything will be fine. I am sorry, I panicked for a moment, the fairy brute said, even forgetting her cute way of talking. It was the clearest sign of how flustered she was. The situation had finally calmed down a little and Finn seemed to be better. However, Seth's face suddenly fell. Oh no, he sighed, but his words were swallowed. Die! The mighty cry echoed between the mountains. Rumble! An ear-shattering thunder roared as a lightning strike comparable to the shot of an orbital laser illuminated the mountains in its blazing light. The pillar of light struck the Nukkalavi and completely swallowed the figure, scorching an area of several hectares. Seth had noticed Ceres too late. The bird brain had not gotten the message and immediately attacked the moment it spotted the beast below the cliff. Blinded by the light, they took several moments to make out what the situation came to. The demonic horseman's outside was completely charred with steam slowly rising from the shambling monsters. It was still standing and didn't seem dead. Oh, no, the fairy repeated Seth's sigh, but with utmost terror. Her eyes widened and she was hiding behind the blacksmith's shoulder. I'm sorry, Finn. But it seems like we have no choice but to fight. At least we had a good first shot. If we hurry we might be able to finish it off, he assumed. The milk was already spilled, after all. No, no, no. This isn't over yet. You have to stay and hide. We don't stand a chance. It's over the moment you come in contact with its aura. Die. Die. I said. Die. They were interrupted by the elementals cawing. Ceres had swooped in and started hammering the humanoid head with its beak, crying die, every time it struck. A thick, dark vapor rose from the beast as it started healing at a visible rate and the dark scabs of burned flesh kept falling to the ground. However, it still kept stumbling as its bobbing head was struck by the golem's beak. Even as its opponent was healing from the surprise attack, Ceres had no intention to let off. The arm covered in dark vapor started to slap, grab, and claw at the agile bird that kept dodging its attack just to follow up with one of its own. This seems a little one-sided, Yvette uttered, watching the bird wail at the giant horseman monster. What do you know? A Nukkalavi can't be killed. Finn lashed out at her. A loud crash signaled another change in the battle below. The horseman had finally managed to land a blow and smacked the bird automaton in the mountainside. With the rising dust cloud, no one could see how Ceres was, but Seth knew it was fine. A adamantium body was nothing to joke about. Cock, it's too late. For you, they heard from the dust cloud. At the same time, two golden feathers shot out and struck the chest of the horse and human torso respectively. With a loud cry, a lightning barrier was suddenly erected around the Nukkalavi. Thick arcs of electricity were jumping back and forth between the feathers stuck in the beast and the ones on the ground surrounding the area. None of them had noticed the golem preparing such a move. The beast was trapped in a circle of lightning and unable to move as it constantly suffered paralyzing damage from the elemental's trap. It shot several more feathers, to give the magic more entry points. Kukiku, if I can't grill you in one swoop, I will slowly bake you until even your innards are burned crisp and crumbly. The bird caught at the struggling nightmare fuel. I hope you usually have that bird under control. Lena couldn't help but say, as she watched the psycho creation of Seth having fun in slowly cooking its enemy. Seth, you have to stop it. A Nukkalavi can't be killed. This will only lure more of them here. Finn finally said in a very serious voice. It seemed that by watching the fight she was finally able to collect her thoughts. Her words reminded Seth of something else that couldn't be killed. He used clairvoyance and concentrated on his soul capture. His suspicions were confirmed. There were a few ways supposed immortality played out, and most of the time it had to do with the situation of the soul. Looking at the beast, it was very similar to Azarchist but less elaborate. While Azarchist's soul was bound to the mortal plane by divine chains, the Nukkalavi was simply not the main body. It only contains a fraction of the soul and was continuously supplied mana to heal through the thing's connection to the main body or controller. Don't worry, Finn. It picked the wrong opponents. No, wait, we attacked first. We picked the right opponent. Chapter 523. Memories. An arrow pierced the ground just outside the lightning formation. Did you miss? Lena asked, confused. However, Seth only kept watching the body of the beast. Moments later the body finally slumped down under the constant damage of the electric arcs. No, I didn't miss, the blacksmith said smugly, putting down the reaper bow. The arrow he had shot was a soul armament, and the place he aimed at was the soul tether that connected the bast to whatever source it originally came from. With this connection cut, the body lost all control and had the last bit of vitality burned away by Ceres. Haha! You have finally given up, the bird brain gloated victoriously. It didn't seem like the golem was aware of its mistake or the fact that it was Seth's doing that ended the struggle. See, I told you I would burn everything that dares to come too close, the bird exclaimed when it flew back up to them. Its tone of voice and non-existent expression asked for praise. Maybe this was just the blacksmith's interpretation, but he did not have the heart to tell it the truth. Why yes, Ceres. Well done. I knew I can count on you. Although the danger was gone, Finn didn't seem calm at all. Finn, are you okay? No, not at all. We have to get away. I'm sure there will be more, and the fact you did whatever you did will only make it angry. The fairy urged them to flee. He looked up to the others in the group. They had just finished setting up camp and not gotten any rest, but nobody seemed opposed to going along with Finn's wishes. Usually, the fairy was hard to shake, even in the face of hopeless danger. Seeing her this stressed was enough for most of them to accept the danger of the situation. Okay, then we will go and look for another camping site. Hearing this, Finn visibly calmed down. They hurried to pick up their things and got back on the bus to change sites. As Mike flew them around looking for another space to land, Seth brought out a tablet. Turning on the screen, he inhaled in surprise. He had left one of the recorder golems to see what would happen. On the screen, he could see a whole group of the skinless beasts crowing in the place where they had killed the first. Only the blackened and partly molten stone still told of the battle. The beast's corpse had found its way into Seth's inventory before they left. With a crowd of them in place, the whole area was cloaked in a dark mist as they searched the place. Suddenly the screen started malfunctioning as Seth lost connection to the recorder. How is it? Mina came over to ask. Finn was right. A whole bunch appeared, but just I lost connection to the recorder, the blacksmith sighed. It was probably the breath. A Nukkalavi's breath can make anything living instantly rot and die of disease, but even other materials will start deteriorating quickly. The fairy had finally calmed down enough to explain. Have you calmed down? What was that back then? Lixis butted in, asking the fairy. My. She halted with a sorrowful expression. I didn't mean to be rude. You don't have to talk about it if it's something painful. Lixis hurriedly added when she noticed the tiny brute's heart-wrenching expression. No, it's okay. It's already been a long time. Just seeing that thing caught Finn unprepared, she explained with a little smile. You see, when I was younger our fief was attacked by a Nukkalavi and my teacher. He managed to repel it, but he came in touch with the rotting breath. He and many others who fought that day died a horrible death. I just didn't want any of you to experience that fate. I'm totally fine, see. Ceres butted it, showing its pristine golden plumage. Finn, are you okay? Mina voiced before Seth had the chance. The fairy looked at the two who were looking at her with worry. Yes, Finn is fine. It's just a little shameful. It has been so long since Finn last thought of her teacher, and it took something like this for it to happen, she answered with an absent smile. Nobody dared to further interrupt Finn's nostalgic flashback until they found another place to set up camp. They repeated what they did before and finally got the chance to enter their tents for some sleep. Do you think Finn is okay? Mina whispered in his arms. I think so. Despite her usual behavior, Finn can be very mature, you know that too. I believe she will speak up if there really is a problem. After breakfast the next morning, they set off again, flying straight north. It didn't take long for a vast body of water to appear to their right. This was the Sigma and Inland Sea, they had been a lot closer than expected. Which also explained the presence of something supposed to be a sea demon. This sea split the northern mountains into an eastern and western part, and at its northern shore was Sigma. The district was sandwiched between the Inland Sea and the Northern Ocean. The river connecting the two split the district right down the middle. The plan was to fly along the edge and directly pass by the northern mountains this way. The chance to meet flying beasts in the mountain was quite high but very low over the sea. Still, they didn't cross straight over it, because who knew what the waters really harbored? Flying along the coast was the best option. For now. Once past the mountains, they would pass Sigma in a similar way. They did not intend to enter Sigma district for now but only fly along its outskirts where Lena lost connection with the scouts. Despite the princess's wish to investigate, they had come to the agreement beforehand, that Seth's quest had priority. They planned to reach the ocean in the evening and start looking for Hyperboreus the next day. Wow, this is really beautiful, Lena exclaimed in awe as he flew along the coast. The light of the early morning played on the waves and they had a clear view of the vast sea. In the far distance, they could see the foothills of the eastern part of the northern mountains. It would have been even more beautiful if the small dots in the sky above the sea had been birds and not monsters. They had miscalculated just a little when they chose this route. Mountains with flying beasts on either side and a big body of water between them. There were not fewer monsters, there were more. Giant eagles, abhorrent seagulls, flying snakes, and even wyverns or real griffins were migrating back and forth between their nests in the mountains and their food source, the sea. It happened more than once that they were able to observe a wyvern or a bird of prey diving into the floods and emerging with a massive fish or nightmarish eel in their claws. Below the scenic waves, the water seemed to be frothing with all kinds of aquatic creatures. But this was not one-sided. Occasionally a giant water beast would jump and snatch one of these avian predators. Some of the birds that dove in would not emerge, either. The crux of the matter was, Ceres had the time of its life zapping all kinds of medium-sized flying beasts out of the air. Hey, catch me that one, Ceres. Seth would call once in a while when it killed a beast that seemed worth the materials. Seth didn't have a lot of flying golems and he thought of using the golem forge to build up an air force with these. Mike was careful with their flight path and they tried to evade the stronger and bigger flying beasts like wyverns, rocks, or the occasional giant sky rays. It was crazy how many beasts there were in the air and how few of them were attacking each other. They traveled for several hours along the shores of the inland sea before the skyline of Sigma finally came into view. Chapter 524. 24th Ethnarch. It was a nice day but the silhouette of Sigma's skyline in the distance gave him a foreboding feeling. Something felt wrong. Mike, make sure to get some distance from the outskirts, the blacksmith told the catman at the steering wheel. Ah, sure. Mike said and turned the shuttle a little so they would fly by Sigma at some distance. Don't you think we could enter Sigma and look for people that know something about your island? Lena mentioned. It's by definition an island that no mortal can know the location of. I doubt there is anyone that could tell us. We have to look for it ourselves, he denied. I seemed like she was still trying to get them to look for her scouts first. But the blacksmith didn't have it. He couldn't help the feeling that they would be pulled into whatever trouble Sigma was in if they entered it now. Seth was afraid of angering Apollo by losing time on a side quest. Despite keeping their distance from the smaller buildings on the outskirts of Sigma, Seth had a good look at the city thanks to the Eye of Argos. However, there was not much to see. It reminded him of the time in Beta. The district was empty. There were some damages from what Seth assumed to be fights with monsters, but otherwise, the city was empty. Empty streets, lifeless buildings. That didn't have to mean anything, Seth thought to himself. With how many monsters were present in the sea, it would have been a wonder if the district didn't suffer over the past 2 years. Y City also had a huge area of abandoned ruins, people might have migrated to the district center for safety here too. Seth doubted there would be a lot of those terrifying living dungeons going around. At least he hoped so. The blacksmith sighed. When had he become unable to stay out of other people's business? Although he wasn't ready to delay his quest, he started dropping recorder golems here and there to have a look at the situation on the ground. Sigma's huge cityscape stretched all the way from the shores of the inland sea, to the coast of the Northern Ocean. After crossing the mountains the climate also saw a big change. The temperate north of the northern mountains sank and the forests below them were covered in a fine layer of snow. What shocked the blacksmith was the layers of snow on the streets of Sigma. Seth had kind of gotten used to seeing snowy towns during in travel with Finn. The first time he had seen a concrete jungle covered in snow was the mountain city. But for a district to look like this. Even when the general climate was colder, Sigma was not supposed to look like this. The dense city structures of the districts had always held in the heat generated by vehicles, people, and the underground facilities that allowed them to stay self-sufficient. A cold district. The concept itself seemed outlandish to him. At street level, where the sunlight didn't reach into the deep chasms between buildings, it was a dark and frozen world. Where electric lights and artificial heat were supposed to create a, not friendly, but habitable place reigned a frozen darkness. For Seth, this scene was disturbing, but objectively he couldn't find any other signs that something was wrong. The city was intact, the streets were not covered in blood or corpses, and everything just seemed abandoned. There was no obvious sign of danger. The lack thereof despite the obvious discrepancies was more concerning. "Can I also have a look?" the princess asked, looking over his shoulder at the tablet screen. "Sure, take this one." The blacksmith readily gave her a second screen to share the vision of recorder golems. Since nobody but Mike had much to do, he ended up giving everyone a screen. It took several hours for them to pass by Sigma and they finally saw the ocean in the distance around late noon. Despite everyone taking part in the exploration of Sigma, they found absolutely nothing. Districts were massive and the recorder golems barely crossed the outskirts, even after hours of being deployed. "I feel a presence watching us," Lena's cloaked escort suddenly exclaimed. Something triggered the automatic defense of the shuttle, Mike commented at almost the same time. "When did it get so dark outside?" Mina suddenly asked, prompting everyone to look out the windows. It was true, the outside was enveloped in a dim twilight as if it was already evening. With a sudden jolt that threw everyone forward, the shuttle slowed down and came to a stop. "What is it now, Mike?" Seth exclaimed, slightly pissed as he almost crashed face first into the wall that separated the cockpit and cabin. Mike only pointed at the windshield. Seth followed his finger and noticed something like a spectral skeleton fish in front of them in the sky. It was surrounded by a raving mass of fish bones, that looked like a long body that was constantly moving and turning in recurring patterns. "How peculiar. So there are other people in this world that can withstand my curse," a hollow voice spoke curiously. The skeletonized skull of what looked like an armored fish with intense bone-shielded eyes appeared from the void. "You are the ones that have been spying on my territory." I feel a familiar presence among you. It feels similar to some other rats that came earlier." Seth noticed the figure stiffen beside Lena. It was probably talking of the scout parties the princess had sent before. "I guess this answers what happened to the scouts," Seth mumbled. Except for him, the bus was silent. Only filled with ragged breaths. Looking back, he found that most of them were pale and frozen in fear. Ding! "You skill, fear resistance, passive, leave 8 has become fear resistance, passive, leave 9. A skill he had almost forgotten because there had been no reaction for quite a while suddenly jumped up to answer his question. A pressure he had not noticed before was alleviated. Was it the doing of the beast in the front? Seth tried using observation but it didn't come up with any result. Its level was so far apart that he didn't even see the name, or it was not part of the system. "Kukiku, you can still speak in my presence. It is almost a shame that your life will end today. As a sign of appreciation, I shall tell you the name of the person who killed you. I am the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond. You should feel honored to die by my hand," it stated seriously. "Ceres, what are you doing?" "Attack it," Seth prompted the lightning bird. After the disaster with the horse monster, the bird tended to wait for a command, before attacking. "Yes," it called out enthusiastic, and lighting rained on the skeletal creature. "Ha ha ha, your attempts are futile," the Ethnarch laughed as electric arcs ran across the bones with little to no effect. "Wolfram, distract it." Seth brought out another trump card. The imposing knight appeared from his inventory, carrying his staff and shield. He jumped out of the bus door and climbed on the roof. Shortly after, the night was lit up by purple rays zigzagging through the air. Where they hit the beast's body, it immediately turned into pieces of metal. Ugh! Divine power, disgusting. This time it reacted to the attack, and its eye focused on Wolfram. With its attention pulled, the magic knight started levitating and flew to the side, peppering the Ethnarch in spells that transmuted it into metal. I seemed like divine power was the spectre's weakness. The metallic patches on the beast pulling the lightning also opened a chance for Ceres to inflict more damage to the foe. Using the chance, someone slipped out of his pet space. Moments later, a massive ray of light pierced the raving body from the sky above. Puffle's signature move. The beast being bigger than the nightmare centipede only made it a giant target. Once again a formless pressure was lifted and the others got back to their senses. Mike! Get us out of her, he urged the catboy, shaking his shoulder to get him out of his stupor. He nodded and hurriedly whipped the steering wheel around, making a sharp turn with the shuttle. Don't think this is enough to escape my grasp, it cried, with its eyes glowing a deep red full of wrath. Portals opened in the surrounding sky and terrifying monsters emerged at the spectre's command. Chapter 525. A Blacksmith's Instruments. We have to land. Mike screamed in a panic when a whale-sized zombie fish rammed into their bus. With the others still in a stupor, Seth could only erect a fire shield around the shuttle, to protect it from harm. Don't land. Keep aiming for the ocean, I will take care of this. The pressure was gone now, but Lena had never experienced being frozen like this. To be grabbed by a kind of primal fear made her feel sick. Her fear resistance was level 3 and even went up by 2 levels but to no avail. How was Seth fine? Grabbing the frame of the bus door and pulling himself on the roof in one smooth move, she watched the blacksmith leave the bus. What was he going to do? She found herself thinking, still in a weird stupor. She was only slowly recovering her senses, but what she saw made her doubt them. A bright blue light suddenly illuminated the sky outside. Looking out the window she was a fire nova waltzing across the sky. A billowing wave of pale blue flames expanded and swallowed up the parade of undead. Silence. What made the scene absolutely surreal was how the fire didn't roar and only the cries of pain and wails of suffering from the undead that were swallowed filled her ears. The pale flames relentlessly ate away at the undead sea creatures, even after the wave passed them and they were falling from the sky like fireflies. Like small pieces of ember that were blown in the air by a campfire. She had only really seen him in action as a bard. Lena had heard the reports about his skill with fire but this was outlandish. Then there were his golems. In the distance was the raving mass of spectral bones, busy with fighting the lightning bird, the nightmare centipede, and another creation Seth had pulled from his sleeve. Just how many secrets did he have? But she couldn't help but feel like those broad shoulders seemed quite reliable. Okay, Mike, get me to the ground. Hurry. Once I am off, you have to shoot for the ocean. Seth urged his friend after returning inside when the shuttle stabilized. What are you planning to do? Mina asked worriedly. The team had recovered and all of them looked at him with worry. Did they think he was going to sacrifice himself to let them escape? He had to explain. I want to fight it to test something out. I'm worried you might get caught up in the aftermath of my attack. Ever since he got the trait of Kin of Fire, Seth held no more fear of the undead. With his high level and all options of his legendary gloves unlocked, the subordinates were no problem. But he had a different plan for the big guy. It would make a good guinea pig. Blacksmith, I know you are strong, but we aren't weak. Although I embarrassed myself earlier, you should let us help. The cloaked figure beside Lena stood up. This was the misunderstanding he wanted to evade. Mina and the others also didn't seem convinced that he wasn't just telling them to run and sacrifice himself. He sighed. I really mean it. I'm afraid of literally disembodying your souls and or disintegrating it if you stay too close. Seth answered honestly. He meant especially the princess and her guard. The members of Minas Mar all wore soul armaments to protect them against these kinds of attacks, but what Seth was about to try might even endanger them. Since Lena and her guard were there, he didn't directly mention the soul armor, but his friends seemed to understand. Only the guard of the princess seemed unconvinced, however. Lena made him stand down. Since Seth's people trusted him, she would do so, too. The shuttle hovered several meters over the ground for Seth to jump out. After he safely landed in a clearing outside the city, it sped off in the direction of the open sea in the distance. Seth signaled for the Puffles and the other to get away from the thing. So far they had been successfully playing catch with the Ethnarch, but they were unable to do any real damage to the creature. Wearing the cloak of Hecate, he used double cast and quick cast to summon 2 firestorms. Injecting his spirit flame into the spell, he sent it against the spectre to get its attention and give Puffles and the other 2 a chance to retreat to him. The beast was not stupid and tried to evade the huge whirling masses of blue fire. After seeing what the same fire did to its subordinate, it had no intention to tank it. It was too big to move out of the way, but Seth was able to observe parts of it slowly vanishing as if phasing out of reality. It was the first time they heard its otherworldly screech when it couldn't evade quick enough and parts of its body were swallowed in the fire. Hiding behind this wall of fire, Puffle, Wolfram, and Ceres managed to return to Seth. Ceres, Follow the shuttle and protect them, Seth commanded, while the other two entered his pet space and inventory respectively. In exchange, Ounce appeared beside him. Seth took a deep breath. "Are you ready for a thrilling performance?" the blacksmith asked as he loosened his shoulders. It didn't take long, but longer than the bard had estimated, for the Ethnarch to escape the firestorm. Some distance away from where the whirling firestorm was slowly dying down, the disturbing skeletal body appeared again from thin air, rushing towards Seth with its prehistoric-looking fish skull and eyes seething with fury. Even when it spotted Seth in the cloak of Hecate, it did not slow down, so the undead amity of his cloak was not working on it. He didn't really count on it. The Wraith Guard appeared on his hand and Charon's obol in it. Standing there with his hammer in hand, the anvil of Tartarus appeared before him. A soul-shivering choir emerged from his throat as he emulated the soul-torturing ballads of demonic bards. The Ethnarch halted in place, but it was too late. The hammer had been lifted, and it fell. Energy coursing through the tool, it crashed onto the anvil and thunder erupted, drowning out the world. This was Seth's answer. He may be a bard, but he was first and foremost a blacksmith. As such, his anvil was his instrument of choice. Traveling with the speed of sound, the power of the ballad swallowed the world around Seth and also the Ethnarch. Accompanied by the demonic lyre's play, the bard hammered on the anvil. At some point, the forge and furnace joined with the roaring of flames. Light smacks, heavy hits, glancing blows. The thunder of powerful strikes and the clear ringing of metal on metal weaved into a rhythm. With every hit of the hammer, a shockwave was created, made possible by the amplification of instrument mastery. What seemed like a cacophony of chaos at first came with a rhythm that kept swelling and further fleshing out as it joined with its own echoes. He himself was not spared from the power, wrenching on his soul, but he had strengthened his soul armaments and wore the Wraith Guard. He did his homework after his experience with the Angel Soul. With these preparations and his own modifications to the song, it had a lot less impact on him, than on those around him. As expected, Seth's music worked wonders on the incorporeal being. "What is this infernal noise?" it screeched in pain. It was unable to keep hovering in the sky. It fell to the ground writhing in agony. Parts of its body kept phasing in and out. The bard could only imagine what this would feel like to a conscious being whose body was probably formed from its soul. Like having hot needles shoved under the fingernails? Or maybe like someone directly piercing a nerve. It didn't matter to him. Why should it? This was a creature that was about to kill him and his friends. Who knew what kind of shenanigans it was up to in Sigma? The spirit smith's ballad kept resounding in the vicinity and he still kept going, even as the creature begged for mercy. "Please, I beg you, stop. I will give you anything. I can give you power. I won't even take your soul or anything, just please, stop." He kept stalking in its speech to cry or gasp in pain. Its body, which already had burns and scorched places, had started forming cracks all over, with small parts even crumbling away. Seth judged it as a direct representation of the state of its soul. If it was like this, maybe he could. The song waned away, the hammer made a last strike and the lyre fell silent. "So you make deals with souls on the line like some demon folks do? How many souls do you have?" he asked in a friendly manner. "What?" Chapter 526. Collecting Souls. The weakened beast could not fathom what was going on. It was the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond. A ruler of a region with uncountable minions. How did it happen that it ended up at the mercy of a mortal? He had gone as far as to disgrace himself and beg for his life. Even offering power and wishes, was this not enough? Was this human so bent on killing him, despite everything it had to offer? "Why do you ask for the number of souls? Are you going to judge me on the vain belief that life has a worth? On how many lives I have taken?" it mocked in derision. "What kind of nonsense are you spouting now? You offered power for your life, but I don't trust your deals. If you want to pay for your life, pay with a currency I deem valid. Cough up all the souls you have and I will judge whether you have enough to buy your life." What was wrong with this human? Why was he so weird? A human that wanted souls? But it had devoured the souls it had attained. How was it supposed to hand him souls? Maybe it could cheat him. A little earlier. With the last sound of the lyre, a row of notifications sounded in his head. Ding! A synergy between your classes has strengthened your ballad. Ding! You have created an epic piece of music. Proficiency gained. Ding! Skill, singing, journeyman, LV2 had become singing, journeyman, LV3. Ding. Skill, instrument mastery, adept, leave 8 had become instrument mastery, adept, leave 9. Ding. A soul-thrilling performance. Title, Composer of Death had been strengthened. Damage done by sonic attacks is now increased by 15%. And more. Most of his music-related skills gained a level, but he had to focus on the beast. After having their small talk, the beast's long skeletal body on the ground started shrinking and dissolving. Like icicles turning into water droplets, bone for bone melted and turned into a soul orb. Soul fragment of the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond, medium, rare, crafting material. A fragment that was detached by a creature called the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond. A clean soul shard with a basic affinity for sorcery and necromancy. The fragments ranged between medium and big in size, but the description was always the same. Was this because it would absorb souls directly instead of collecting them? He heard some demons or devils did that too, but most had a stash with souls to use as currency. Unfortunately, there had not been any such demons in Delta, yet. Otherwise, he would have already traded with them to get more souls. What made him suspicious was the fact that soul capture did not automatically collect these fragments. Although he didn't see any connection between the fragments and the Ethnarch, maybe it had a way to reclaim them. After all, they were fragments of its soul. Is this enough? It asked after separating roughly 300 souls from its body. Its eerie body had shrunk by more than half, leaving an even more broken-looking fish spectre behind. Seth looked at it and the souls strewn on the ground. He leaned against the anvil and played around with the hammer in his hand. The creature's eyes were glued to Karen's obel. Say, these aren't souls, they are fragments of your soul, right? How did you know? No, no they aren't, it tried to deny. You see, I bet you have a way to reclaim them somehow afterward. The deal is off the table, he said with a smirk. What happened next happened too quickly for the Ethnarch to react. The man stepped forward in one quick motion and grabbed its skull with that weird gloves. It suddenly felt paralyzed and weak. It tried to call back the soul fragments but a foreign power originating from the glove enveloped its body. It felt like it was cut off from the world and then there was this strange pull. It struggled to stay away from it, but it couldn't win. The pull promised peace and serenity and when it felt tired it finally gave up. It had gone through too much today. Peace sounded good. Serenity sounded fine. A small break maybe? The next moment it couldn't sense anything. Hear anything, it had experienced this before. A time when it had not yet been the Ethnarch when it had not yet been anything. No. No, 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 no it couldn't be true. This was not peace or serenity. Its soul. It had been stolen and now it was trapped in itself, at the mercy of its captor. Soul of the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond, massive, epic, ego, crafting material. The soul of the 24th Ethnarch of the Beyond. A being that was on its way to becoming a legend. Affinity with necromancy, sorcery, illusion, and spatial manipulation. In the end, the price it was able to pay was not enough for Seth to spare it, so he harvested its soul directly. Had it not already been weakened, Seth would have doubted he could have collected it, even with the help of the Wraith Guard. This time it was the soul and not just a fragment. It shared some effects with the fragments, but there were also illusion and spatial manipulation. Especially the latter interested Seth greatly. Skills related to space were rarer than one might think. How much did he wish for a pocket dimension where he could store creations like Ceres or the Faer? Maybe he could make something like that with this soul? After he harvested the main soul, soul capture sucked the fragments into his soul space. Ugh, can we not do that again? Like ever, Ounce complained in a pained voice. Despite giving the liar soul armament, it had taken quite some damage. It would heal over time, but Seth wouldn't be able to do the same in the close future. Are you guys okay? He asked in the pet space. I'm fine, Mom, Tatzel answered. Puffles, Seth asked again when the Evisor didn't answer. Ugh, what could possibly be wrong with the great me? Even if I took a sneak peek, would your low-tier music be able to hurt me? The nightmare centipede moaned. So he had looked. This has been one of his worries since they were able to observe the situation from inside the pet space. As long as they didn't, they wouldn't be affected by the music, but if they did, only his soul armament was able to prevent harm. Puffles, do you think you are fine enough to catch the bus? Seth asked worriedly. He was only confident in telling them to go without him because he had the flying nightmare centipede. The fight was quite the commotion and more bests might be coming soon. Seth made sure to not show it on the outside, but he was worse off than it might seem. The ballad had bottomed out his mana and mental energy. It didn't mean he was helpless, or anything, but it didn't feel great to have limited options. Why do you ask? I'm fine. Fine. I have not peeked. Why would the great me want to see your child's play? Humph. He argued indignantly. Seth heard howls in the distance. Yes, it was time to go. Otherwise, they might not be able to find Mina and the others again. Sure, then can we set off? Seth caved in. Of course. The eye-visor appeared, posing majestically. The blacksmith climbed in his back and they set off towards the sea. This was new, right? Seth asked, perplexed. The god of chaos and destruction had finally broken the silence that ensued as the god stared speechlessly at what Seth did. They had watched the blacksmith practice playing on the anvil and saw the destructive force in the dungeons. But this was the first time he combined the destructive soul ballads he learned for the refining of the angel souls with his own style of music. It was hauntingly effective. Do you think we should warn Apollo? Hephaestus asked in the room. No, it should be okay. The lyre was heavily damaged in this round. He probably won't use it on Scorpio, the god of the underworld denied. But what if he does? Asking for forgiveness is better than asking for permission. It's not like we can stop it at this point. He is already about to enter Hyperboreus. Hades said with a tiny smirk around his lips. Sigma. The 24th vanished, a voice stated in the darkness. Was it Vlad? Another voice asked. Did his sister make her move and betrayed us? A third suggested. No, nobody left the wards, a fourth voice denied the second. It seems like he vanished outside the city. Was it something from this world? One mused. He was weak, but I wouldn't have expected him to fall in such a world, another voice commented. None of them sounded concerned or very moved. There was no sympathy between the ethnarchs of the beyond. How about we just name a new 24th ethnarch and have him look into it? The first voice suggested. Good idea. I second this. Yes. Good. A multitude of voices sounded their agreement. Nobody was interested enough to move themselves for something like the 24th ethnarch. They gladly shoved the investigation to some unknown pawn in the future. Chapter 527. The Wards. Sigma. Bright light flashed across the night sky, traveling so far it could even be seen in the center of Sigma, which was protected by a luminous hemisphere of light. Sir Vlad, there is someone that wants to speak with you, a staff member announced her presence. Sir Vlad was currently turned towards a big front of windows, watching the lights in the distant skies. He turned towards the door when he heard the staff's notice. Is it about the fight? The pale man asked, looking at them with a cold gaze. And no, sir. It is a guest, a messenger from the outside who arrived in the wards this morning. The outside? From the other districts? Bring the messenger in, quickly, he said, surprised. The messenger stepped aside and Cade could finally step forward. The moment she stepped forward, she could smell that the other was not a human, but she was unsure what creature he was. Vlad, on the other hand, seemed to have noticed her hints of hesitation. With a smile, he exposed his canines and gave her a short look at his vampire fangs. Do not worry. I am not hiding the fact that I am a vampire. I am Vlad Pierce, the contemporary leader of Sigma's resistance. Seeing that the staff member didn't react either, it seemed like what Vlad said was true. It also explained what she had heard about him on the way. It had taken a while to more or less calm down the girl she saved, and it was kind enough to show her the way and vouch for her to enter the wards, as the locals called it. According to the girl, it was a safety parameter that Vlad Pierce managed to set up in a time of emergency, that saved most of Sigma's people. The reason was quite obvious to Cade. While they waded through masses of people on the streets within the wards, the outside was a ghost city crawling with unknown horrors. Even she had her skin constantly crawling for reasons she couldn't fathom at all. They had used the illusion spells of her Rakshasa class to get past the manifestations of body horror they came across on the way. She had seen things that made the hairy wolf beasts look cute. There were moments when she wanted to go back. However, the inside of the luminous barrier set up by mysterious magic signs and effigies was safe. Cade had not forgotten her mission. It was to get in contact with Sigma and find out what happened. Now that she was already stuck here, she decided to fulfill her mission, so that in case she managed to return, it wouldn't be empty-handed. She even had the slight hope that the people of Sigma might help her get out. After all, they seemed to be in a tight spot, literally. Helping her get back could also lead to her bringing back help. Her strength and background brought her in front of the local leader. I'm Kate Albright from Gamma. I came as a scout in service of Princess Lena of Krina, the Empire's ambassador in Delta. She pattered a well-practiced line to introduce herself. Just this alone held a lot of information, but it was so common to her, that she was surprised by Vlad's confused look. That was, a lot. I believe we have a lot to talk about and I would love to take my time for it. But as you see, we have a situation out there. I doubt we can sit down and have a talk, without anyone interrupting us within the next 20 minutes, he said. His finger pointed to the sky that was slowly calming down. Kate nodded. She had noticed the strange phenomena the moment she entered the room. Then how about we use this time efficiently? If you could give me a short summary or explanation of what happened in Sigma, I would be very thankful, the Rakshasi said with a sweet smile, oozing with seductive charisma. No need for tricks, I don't see a problem in that, if you give me a summary of what happened on Earth, he said amicably and offered her a seat. Against his original estimation, it took 30 minutes for a messenger to arrive and ask him to join a meeting. At this time, Cade told him the overall situation of Delta, Y City, and Beta. Vlad on the other hand told her what happened in Sigma. The story began quite similar to her own. At first, Sigma managed to cope with the sudden appearance of monsters, portals, mana, and magic. Early on they still tried to send messengers to Omega and the other districts, but nobody ever came back. They finally gave up on contacting others and managing themselves. That was until several weeks ago, many seals appeared all over the city and massive monoliths emerged from them. The atmosphere of Sigma changed as if life was being sucked out of the people and fear was injected instead. The things called themselves Towers of Trial and started spewing high-ranking monsters into the metropolis. Vlad did not go into the details of his skills or origin but managed to set up this safety parameter where the people evacuated to. This was as far as they got before someone interrupted their talk. Sir Vlad, we have news from our insider about. He glanced at Cade. Well, they have news. The other leaders wish to consult with you about our next steps, he said, making sure to not reveal any important information. Please excuse his cautiousness. I will have to leave, would you like to stay here? I will have a room prepared for you, the vampire said with an apologetic smile. Oh, sure, it's okay. Cade didn't mind, since she had gotten a rough understanding of the situation. Although she was sure Vlad was still hiding something, the prospect of getting some sleep in a real bed was too enticing. Thank you, Ms. Albright, I will go to the meeting. Please lead our guest to one of the guest rooms, he told the man before taking his leave. She looked after him for a moment, before the officer spoke to her. Please follow me, he asked and led the way. The building they were in was originally the central police station of Sigma. To improve the effectiveness of the police, it was situated in a strategic location that allowed for quick employment of officers. It had also barracks for staff and cells. It naturally became the headquarters for the survivors of Sigma. The hallways were bustling with people and everyone seemed to have a task. It made Cade reminisce about the past when she was tall, leading role in organizing. Not everything was bad. She still had her family in the beginning, but the nostalgia didn't stay for long, as the memories also brought up old wounds. That was right, she still had unfinished business. So much had happened and kept getting in her way, but now most of her problems were settled. The residents of Gamma. The people that had betrayed her, what if they were still alive? Maybe it was time, when she got out of Gamma she would. Here, this is the best free room we have, the guide interrupted her thoughts. She shelved her thoughts for later and took a look. It was a tiny, Spartan room. It had barely enough space for the slim bed and the small table with a chair that was placed inside. Since you are a guest, you are free to roam the station, but please don't cause a commotion. I will take my leave. Then he excused himself and hurried away. He probably was going to take part in that important meeting, too. With a sigh she let herself fall on the bed. It was hard but softer than the ground. It was almost painful when sore muscles finally relaxed. The room was quiet but didn't stay so for long. From the hallways outside Cade could hear the clear voices of children. Nadine, why do we have to stay here? A snotty boy voice asked. And where are Mom and Dad? A whiny girl complained sadly. You do know that your Mr. Pierce is very busy right now and your mother is also trying to help. They want us to stay here because it is safe, mature voice explained to the children. She heard a door open and close. A moment later. "Big sister, are you new here?" the bright girl's voice suddenly asked, brimming with curiosity. Kate had not closed her door and the nosy girl had stuck her head inside. She lazily lifted her arm a little to greet the little girl. "Hi. Yes, I'm new. I just arrived here." She tried to sound friendly with mixed success. Kate actually liked children, but how long had it been that she had the chance to interact with someone in a friendly, unguarded manner? "What is that armor? It looks cool," the girl exclaimed unafraid as she entered the room and ogled the polyarcanate armor Rakshasa was still wearing. "It's something I bought in Epsilon. It is a material called polyarcanate. They invented it there," Kate explained with a weak smile. "Poly what?" the boy joined the conversation. Hearing that Kate came from outside of Sigma, the children showed no mercy and peppered her with questions. Although she was tired, she didn't mind talking to them. Telling them of her journey was its own kind of enjoyment. Telling a pair of excited children a story was a rare piece of normalcy in her otherwise chaotic life, and she intended to savor. Chapter 528. Calculated Risk. "It doesn't seem like he managed to catch up," the hooded figure commented. It had been a few hours since they left the continent behind. The sun had already risen on the horizon. "Maybe we could fly back to meet Seth on the way," Mina suggested. She had doubts that Seth would still be able to catch up with them. The party looked to Mike, their leader, who was currently the shuttle captain and pilot. He deliberated about the suggestion for a moment. "You are right. We should turn back and see if we find him," he decided. "What if Seth failed? His sacrifice would be for naught if we run into that thing." The princess started, but she halted when the rest of the team gave her weird looks. "Sacrifice?" Lixus asked, confused, almost flabbergasted. PFF. Suddenly the party burst into laughter and chuckles. "Come on guys, it's not nice to laugh at her like that. It's just a misunderstanding." Mina scolded the others, barely reining in her own chuckling. "Seth wouldn't sacrifice himself just to buy us time or defeat an opponent. If his life was really in danger, he would run," the cat girl explained. "But what if it was too strong for him?" Lena argued. "Then he would have run with us," Mike said as a matter of course. In the meantime, Mike had already made a swerve with the shuttle and they were flying back in the direction they came from. Despite flying for several hours, there were still no signs of Seth or anything else for that matter. "Shouldn't we have met him by now?" Mina asked worriedly. The continent was quickly growing at the horizon. They had already flown back more than half the way, but there were no signs of Seth, Puffles, or even Ceres. Maybe something did happen in the end? Another hour of flight later, they came back to the clearing outside of Sigma, where they had left Seth. Or what had been once a clearing outside of Sigma. The magnitude of destruction was already visible from the air, but they got an even better look when they landed and left the shuttle. Circular fissures covered the place and the few trees and other plants seemed dead, without vigor. At one place the ground looked almost dug over. "Just what happened here?" the princess mumbled, unable to comprehend what kind of battle created such aftermath. "Whatever it was, the thing is not here anymore, so Finn would guess Seth won," the fairy commented optimistically. "But why didn't we meet him on the way back here?" Lena uttered her doubts. "The better question is, what we are going to do from now on," the hooded figure stated. He was right. They had some options about how to continue. One was to search the blacksmith somewhere on the open sea. Taking to account they didn't spot him anywhere on their way back didn't give them confidence in that plan. They could also look for Hyperboreus themselves. In the end, Seth would appear there sooner or later. But none of them knew what that would entail. His option was also a no. Returning was always an option, but leaving Seth behind just like that? "Since we are already here, we could take a look at Sigma," Lena suggested innocently. "That's too dangerous. What if we run into another one of those things?" Mike objected. "That thing was extremely strong, how many of those could possibly be there?" the princess argued. "Well, at least 23 more. After all, it called itself the 24th Ethnarch, right?" The princess fell silent for a minute, but she didn't give up. "It might just be a title, and he is the 24th in line. If Seth beat it, there is a good chance there are only its minions left," she said after some pondering. She had lost 2 teams in this place, so everyone could understand that she was a little driven to explore, after coming so far. Sigma was right in front of her, the answer to what happened to her subordinates. Yvette looked a little conflicted at the princess. "Maybe it would be better if you told them," she whispered to the princess. Told us what? Mina, who had heard it with her good hearing, dug deeper. Well, the thing is, I am pretty sure Kate is still alive and in Sigma. But I don't know her situation. Se might be close to dying for all I know, she finally explained guiltily. Kate? That woman from the evaluation? Why are you so sure that she is still alive? The princess explained that she had recruited her after the evaluation and how she was part of the second scout team. She had lost contact with the team, but she knew that at least Kate was still alive. Although her class didn't have much combat ability, she had the skill to sense her subordinates. It was similar to Seth's sense of knowing where his golems were. This was how the princess knew that Kate was still alive in her rough location. So you are saying this exploratory mission was actually a rescue mission? Mike summed it up for her. Yes, she admittedly meekly. Mike wasn't confident enough to make a decision in this situation and turned to the party. This had a high chance of turning into a suicide mission, he wouldn't say yes or no without consulting them. His worry was unfounded, as none of them heavily objected. Although they were surprised by the vanishing of their Seth, they were not too worried about him. Lena, on the other hand, was their friend and she needed help. Although their relationship started as hired hands, all of them grew to like her and they somewhat owed her for the chance to meet Seth again. They didn't really like the idea of risking their lives in the unknown, but she needed their help on this rescue mission. Fine, but let's rest before we enter Sigma. Mike finally said tiredly. He had been piloting the shuttle for hours and they had not really gotten any good rest during the journey. Let's hope Seth won't be too angry at us for risking our lives, Finn exclaimed, motivated as they set up camp. We just have to run, if things get dangerous, Mina concluded. In the end, they still had the armored shuttle. As long as not another giant fish specter appeared, they would be okay. Probably. It was late afternoon when they readied themselves to enter Sigma. They all had gotten a few hours of rest, Mike even managed to sleep a little. Let's get back in the shuttle and scout Sigma from the sky. We should still have a few hours of sunlight. If you can give me directions, I'm sure we will find her quickly. Mike spoke to Lena. He really hoped they could find her and get out before nightfall. The idea was easy to understand. The less time they spent in Sigma, the less chance there was to be noticed and die a horrible death. Taking the initiative, the hooded figure took place in the seat of the co-pilot. Can you show me how to operate it while we are looking? In case we meet another ethnarch, I'm now confident to keep my composure. If I knew how to pilot the shuttle, I could get us out, he explained. On that note, it might be a good idea to layer protective buffs on all of us beforehand, Yvette suggested. We also have some resistance potions from Evie and Allison. They might be of help, too. Bulko suggested. Minasmar had prepared more than enough emergency resources, in case this expedition turned out longer than expected. This wasn't just processed goods, but even food ingredients in case the prepared meals ran out. In the hope to counteract whatever might happen, Bulko, Yvette, and even Finn cast several resistance buffs on everyone. Following that, everyone drank potions of mental and fear resistance to double down on it. They could only hope it would be enough, in addition to the shuttle's own defense mechanisms. They were taking a risk, but a calculated one, as they flew in the sky and entered Delta. They couldn't deny their nervousness when they followed Princess Lena's vague instructions, finally entering the mysterious boundaries of Sigma District. Chapter 529. Sicily. Puffles and Seth flew north over the ocean. It had been 45 minutes, but the shuttle was not in sight and Seth started getting worried. Was the injured Puffles too slow to catch up to the shuttle and Ceres? Hey! I know what you are thinking. How could the Great Me be the problem? It has to be something else. The Eyevisor said defensively. Kektatzel chuckled. Another reason for worry was Puffles' flight time. Although the nightmare pillar grew even stronger, its airtime still didn't go past 1 hour and 30 minutes. If they didn't find the shuttle they would have to swim. I will not swim, Puffles said decisively. What? Wait, Puffles. When I'm out of mana, you are on your own. The Eyevisor mercilessly sentenced him to swim alone in the ocean. The blacksmith looked speechlessly at the back of the giant insectoid's head. This wouldn't be a problem if only he had thought of making an item with water breathing. Half an hour later he became really nervous. It was just about swimming in the deep dark ocean. He heard stuff about the changes in the ocean. It was even more dangerous than the land. He didn't wish to end up as fish bait. You can calm down, I see land over there, the Eyevisor suddenly commented. He was right. In the far distance, he was able to see an island on the horizon in the light of dawn. The light of dawn? When did it even become night? He thought to himself, perplexed. I think we are not on Earth anymore, the Emuji stated. What makes you say so, Tatslo? He asked, although the blacksmith was inclined to believe it. I felt a weird feeling, like a slight disruption earlier. I didn't think a lot of it, but seeing the weird time jump, it might be possible we were transported, the snakelet explained. Now that you mentioned it, I felt that two Puffles supported this theory. The conclusion was obvious. Either they randomly changed dimensions or the island up front was Hyperborea, and they were guided here by the quest. Was this what it meant when it said that the island can only be found by heroes and gods? He didn't expect to be separated from his friends like that. Mina and the other were strong, but Seth still worried about leaving them behind in such a dangerous place. At least Ceres was with them. Die! 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 They heard a caw echo through the sky. So much for that. They found the lightning bird furiously grilling a Levati griffin. The mix of lion and eagle had made the mistake to cross the mix of elemental and machine. Now it was paying the price. Ceres, bring that to me when you are done with that. Seth called to the elemental. Master. Have you already caught up? I'm sorry, I wasn't able to find the shuttle, it apologized guiltily after coming over with the giant body of the griffin in its claws. Despite being several times the bird's size, the automaton had no problem carrying the body of the beast. It's not your fault, I guess. You were probably transported here because you belong to me, or something like that. Just follow me to the island. Although it was a worry that his party wouldn't even have the help of Ceres, he was somewhat glad to have another golem able to fly with him. He wouldn't have wanted to hug Wolfram in case Puffles didn't make it to the island. You are mocking me again, Puffles commented, his thoughts disgruntled. Not at all. I'm just a realist. Humph, the Ivisor huffed but didn't continue the argument. There were a few more griffins that attacked them in the air around the island, but they were no real hindrances when facing Ceres, Puffles, and Tatzel, who demanded to help. Since the little Emuji needed a harrowing amount of experience point, Seth saw no problem in it letting the snakelet accumulate some on the way. Out of consideration for Tatzel's experience, he only harvested 2 of the griffin souls. What surprised him was that they were not griffin souls. Chimeric soul, medium, rare, crafting material. The soul of a beast that is the fusion of 2 or more others. Can effectively adapt to different body shapes. Increased proficiency in flight and melee combat. Chimerism, gains strength by integrating the strengths and memories of various souls. It was Seth's first time seeing a soul like this. Especially chimerism was a concept that went against Seth's experience when it came to souls. His previous experience was that strong souls would grow increasingly muddled and have their abilities watered down without proper refinements. The only exceptions so far were souls he had gained through quests, who somehow possessed a strong trait. But the chimeric soul was different. If the description was correct, one could call it a self-refining soul. He would have to test it, but it might be even better than his manual refining if it was able to incorporate all experiences and traits of absorbed souls into one coherent amalgamation. While Seth was still wondering over the newly discovered soul, Puffles and Ceres closed the distance to this potentially mystical island. The closer they got, the more they realized how big it really was. From the side they were approaching, they saw some small cliffs then gently sloped down to a sand beach. The land past that was a hilly land with a mix of meadows, forests, and fields. The biggest change they had experienced during their approach was probably the temperature. The north of Earth was very cold, but even at night, this place was warm and comfortable. The sun had risen in the meantime and its bright rays warmed the morning air. A cool, refreshing breeze blew from the sea as Seth jumped down onto the sandy beach. They landed beside the mouth of a river where it entered the ocean. Why did we land here? Wasn't the city further inland? Ceres asked, perplexed. Seth had spotted a city from above, but they decided to land on the beach first. Yes, but I don't want to approach that city from the sky. Puffles' appearance might shock some of the people there. It won't take long to reach it on foot if we follow the river. Seth explained and apologetically asked Puffles to return to the pet space. With Ceres circling in the sky above, Seth started walking along the river bank. The water was lined by small groups of trees that gave some shadow. The blacksmith couldn't help but marvel at the scene of wide grasslands and fields that stretched across the hills and dales. He could even spot herds of sheep and other animals peacefully grazing. How long had it been since he saw peaceful animals? Maybe some during his travels to Aura with Finn. But other than that? Wandering through this kind of landscape was a rare chance and, although the circumstances were urgent and he worried for his friends, he couldn't help but enjoy it for just a moment. Seth still preferred the sprawling cityscapes where he grew up, but his subsequent travels had helped him appreciate other places, too. He could befriend himself with grasslands, even if he still couldn't say the same about woods. He almost regretted it when the small town at the banks of the river came into view. Like he had said, it didn't take long to walk the distance, maybe half an hour. It was not a big place, the town might have been too big a descriptor. The village was a group of nice white brick houses with thatch roofs with a small market in the middle. There were no big walls around it, but there was still someone that looked like a guard standing on the main street that led into the village. He wore some ancient armor. A leather cuirass, shin guard, bracers, and a helmet with a white tuft on top of it. In his right hand he held a spear, he was also kind of leaning on. He didn't look very focused and didn't bother with Seth until the blacksmith approached him. "Excuse me, what is the name of this island?" the blacksmith asked friendly. "A stranger, Well, this island is called Sicily, and before you ask, yes. This village is called Catania," he answered lazily. Sicily. This was not Hyperborea. Seth stared at the guard in shock until the man started laughing. "Haha, I can read your thoughts from your face. This is not Hyperborea. All of you visitors are so desperate." After having a good laugh, the guard finally calmed down and said, "But honestly, yes. This is Hyperborea." Chapter 530. Somewhere else, 14. "Aster? Are you all right?" Paolo asked cautiously. Aster has been acting weird lately. As the tank of their party, his demeanor was usually very calm and collected. But lately, he tended to become irate and mess up the party's coordination. He would pull aggro at the wrong time, or attack hastily. More and more often he wouldn't react when they called him during battle. Marco and Paolo had been on their way to meet the others for a dungeon briefing when they spotted Aster in an alley at the coffee shop they wanted to meet at. They came closer and the crouched-down tanker suddenly jerked his head around, looking at them with wide-open, wild eyes. "Hey Aster? Is that blood?" Marco asked insecurely. Looking over the wide man's shoulder, Paolo spotted someone on the ground behind Aster. It was a person in a robe. Shocked, he realized that it was Pia, their mage. The woman was bleeding profusely and her breathing was already very shallow. "What have you done, Aster?" he screamed in a panic and readied his healing magic. Roar! Aster screamed in response and attempted to attack the supporter with his blood-covered hands. A bright silver shadow flashed past in Paolo's vision. With an ear-shattering howl, the hands that were about to attack him fell to the ground. Marco had unsheathed the sanguine silver yatagan and cleaned amputated Aster's hands in one move. "Look after Pia, I will distract Aster," they said seriously, facing their friend. Paolo nodded and hurriedly kneeled down beside the mage to administer first aid. The woman had a deep hole in her abdomen and several broken bones. It wasn't something he could heal immediately, but he was confident to stabilize her condition. "We have to get her to the hospital," he informed Marco, who was busy fighting their tank. Although he had managed to cut off his hands, Aster was surprisingly strong. Much stronger than they knew him to be. The Saberman had been lucky with his surprise attack, as he was unsure how he would fare if this monster still had his hands. He felt conflicted about fighting a comrade they had spent a lot of time with, but this friend didn't give him any pause to feel guilty. At least he was focused on him, giving Paolo a chance to heal Pia. A crowd had assembled on the street outside the alley and someone had enough common sense to call the police. There was a little commotion as the guards and an emergency healer finally arrived a couple of minutes. "Put down your weapons and surrender," they demanded and interfered. Marco backed away when the guard came to subdue Aster. He lowered the yatagan but didn't put it away. If Aster managed to somehow attack again he would be prepared. Seeing him back off, the officer ignored him and started subduing Aster. Despite his beastly powers, these guards made quick work of him. When they had incapacitated Aster, Marco saw them stabbing the tank in the nape with something that looked like an EpiPen. Their former comrade immediately stopped struggling and slowly lost consciousness. In the meantime, the emergency healer had further stabilized Pia's injury and got her out of the scene. Paolo and Marco could only watch their two comrades being carried away. A third officer approached them for an interview. "This is already the 7th time this week," the commissioner exclaimed angrily. "Are there no news from the investigation?" he asked the people seated at the table. The other participants in the meeting could only lower their heads. The commissioner sighed helplessly. He couldn't blame them. Everything had changed too much, too suddenly. Not all of them had gotten classes that fit their jobs, and even then, skills were not omnipotent. Not only counting the time skills wouldn't work or led them to false conclusions. Just getting results from skills acknowledged in court was a difficult topic. On the other hand, skills were a great help for criminals to commit near-perfect crimes. All they had was that a new drug appeared in Delta. It spilled over from Epsilon, where it had already been a problem for several weeks, according to their colleagues over there. Now it had also arrived in Delta, and they had almost no clue about the sources. How they go into the city, how they distribute the drugs, who sold them. They knew almost nothing except for the name and the aftermath. They called the drug Divine Strength on the streets. At first, it allowed the user to permanently raise their physical attributes by several points. It was no different from a potion in that regard. The problem came afterward. Divine Strength was also highly addictive and had several side effects like increased aggressiveness or paranoia. With prolonged intake, the positive effects would diminish, while the side effects would only become stronger until the user's mind finally snapped. These people would act like beasts and attack anything and anyone, unable to recognize their friends or family. At the moment, they could only sedate these people and keep them locked up under observation. Doctors and healers had not yet found a way to help them. Even Y City, where the problem had existed for longer, could only lock up the afflicted and try to find a remedy. "I'm sorry for the interruption, but this is an urgent report." An officer hastily entered the meeting room and apologized. He handed a piece of paper to one of the people at the table. "What is it?" the commissioner asked, seeing the man's shocked expression after he read the report. "Someone broke into the ward where the victims of Divine Strength were held and kidnapped them all." The man summed up the reports before handing them over to the commissioner. "How could this happen?" he exclaimed, agitated. The report backed the man's words. While they had been sitting in this meeting, unknown assailants had attacked the hospital where the victims were held captive. They attacked the police officers stationed to guard them and made off with their captives in the ensuing chaos afterward. The commissioners' faces darkened. Not only had someone kidnapped their witnesses, they were also left with 3 injured officers and 5 casualties among officers and hospital staff. But why? Why would anybody want to abduct these patients? One of the inspectors asked. "This, gentleman, is one of the questions we have to find an answer to," the commissioner answered grimly. "We will intensify our controls. I want more officers on the street. I want the detectives will search every nook and cranny of Delta. I want answers, as soon as possible. Can I count on you?" "Yes, sir," they answered in unison. "Then go and do your job. We have to keep Delta safe." The meeting ended abruptly and they left the meeting room. Chapter 531. Superstition, Fear, and Arrogance. Cinema Dimension. "What a beautiful little bird," Apollo exclaimed. Apollo leaned over to his left, to whisper to Hermes. With Seth's entry to Hyperborea, the god of sunlight obviously joined them. After all, this was kind of a bet between them, and it was a lot more interesting to watch together. "He really made this himself?" he asked, intrigued. Although he was not a god of craftsmen like Hephaestus, he was still a god of the fine arts. He could appreciate a beautiful and functional design. "Ah, I bet he did, but I missed the crafting," Hermes lamented. Even though he was also a god of Olympus, he was not given a discount. The messenger god had to work to earn his watch time. He didn't have the kind of income of divine energy to just stay all the time. "On that note, can't you give your cute nephew a discount, uncle?" he asked Hades cheekily. The god of the underworld simply ignored him and focused on Persephone sitting beside him. The fact that Apollo had given a mortal with the support of the other gods a divine task was a popular topic among the Olympians. It resulted in a bunch of new faces among the audience. Hephaestus only chuckled at Hermes, making puppy eyes at him. "Seth?" he asked meekly. There was a slight hope since they had bonded during their exile in the system god's locker. A friendship had bloomed over beating up Zarkon together. However, the rough-looking man avoided his puppy eyes. "Business knows no friendship. Seth is the only champion I have on Earth, so I won't give any benefits," he said, pressing. Apollo couldn't help but chuckle at his little brother acting cute. "Don't worry, I will make sure you can watch the whole trial," at least he offered to pay for him this time around. "Yush! Thank you, elder brother." "So you are looking for Scorpio?" the village chief pondered after Seth explained his situation. After the guard's little joke, he directly led him to see the elder. Hyperborea didn't get a lot of visitors, but those who came usually had a divine mission or were gods themselves. Since this was so important, the guard shirked everything to the village chief as quickly as possible. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that. Scorpio is not usually on Hyperborea. If it appeared, a rural village like ours would hear about it last," the old man explained apologetically. "Then are there other places where I can look for information?" "Of course. If you follow the path to the south, you will soon reach a road. If you take the right path you will reach the city of Dawn. One of the 3 big cities of the island. I'm sure they can help you there," he said amicably. "South, you say?" The blacksmith was a little perturbed by the direction, but he understood when he looked at his map. He saw the silhouette of Hyperborea and the path he had taken. Although he knew for a fact that he was traveling north when he left Earth's shore, he had also reached the island from its northern side. So either he had crossed the North Pole, or he was a little switched around when being transported. It made sense, but it still confused the blacksmith a little. The old man also told him about the other cities. Dawn in the east, day in the south, and dusk in the west. He felt the naming sense a little childish, but it also made sense as it was the home of Apollo, the god of sunlight. At least, it was easy to memorize. If he didn't find the answers he needed in dawn, he could travel further to day and dusk. This way he would have covered 3 of the cardinal directions. If he still didn't find anything on Scorpio, he knew that it would probably be in the north. "Thank you for the explanation. Then I will be leaving, village chief." Seth said his farewells and left the village towards the south. It had become a sunny day and a salty breeze kept brushing through the grass and trees. As the elder had said, after the path that led to the village he came to a wide road. It was a properly bricked road for wagons and carts. Seth once again realized how quaint everything here was. The day was so beautiful that, the blacksmith got suspicious. Everything was so nice, it started making him feel bothered. Like a piece of clothes that didn't quite fit. "Puffles, let's hurry," he called the Ivisor, but nothing happened. Neither Puffles nor Tatzel answered his call. He was just deliberating whether he should go on as if he didn't notice anything, or bring out his weapons when a figure appeared on the road. "You noticed the illusion, but you are already walked too far in," it said. An illusion? It had to be a strong one to block his telepathy and the option of the necklace to see through illusions. It was a satyr with the upper half of a human and the lower half of a goat. His burly chest, covered in coarse carpet, was comically disproportionate to the tiny-looking goat legs. "What do you want?" Seth decided to try and talk first. "I am Gliobum, the satyr minstrel. Nice to meet you, too. I want nothing much. I wander the land to find musicians to lock horns with." "Do you play an instrument?" the satyr asked, showing off his panpipes. "A battle of music? With the satyr?" This seemed like a reoccurring theme, especially in the stories of Apollo. Was this planned? Or simply his bad luck to run into this? "Why should I agree to have a match with you?" the bard asked warily. "If you want to get out of the illusion you have to beat me in a match. If you win I will give you my most prized possession, my pipes. And if you lose, I will take one of your most prized possessions." So much for just furthering his horizons. Seth thought to himself. The satyr was nothing but a petty thief who robbed people under the pretense of musical exchange. He wouldn't play by the robber's rules. And what?" Gliobum asked. "What else? I have no interest in your instrument, and whatever I possess is worth a lot more than that. Unless you offer a good price, I won't agree. Just let me go," Seth demanded flat out. "I have nothing else. A minstrel is free and unfettered. I have no worldly possession but my instrument," the satyr said contrived. "Right, you would do the world a big favor if you wore a pair of pants." "Enough. I do not have anything else to give you. Accept the challenge or I won't lift the illusion. Only on one condition. I will take the most valuable thing you possess if you lose." "Deal?" Seth asked with a malicious smile. So much for the musical exchange. The blacksmith decided to truly widen his horizons. "Good. As long as you accept." "Haha." With a triumphant laugh, the satyr started to sing a light and sensible tune with a voice so clear and beautiful it didn't fit his rough exterior. In between, he would play his flute. Gliobum's music painted a picture of clear streams and an open sky. Soothing meadows on a summer morning. Seth wanted to puke. Was this what normal bards sounded like? Or was it just the satyr's ancient style? "Huff. I'm done. Your turn," he said with a grin showing his goat-like teeth. The blacksmith looked at him coldly. Superstition, fear, and arrogance. He said solemnly in the dark demonic language. Ounce appeared, but instead of playing himself, Seth started torturing his strings. The day suddenly darkened as a language he couldn't understand suddenly grasped his mind. Cleobum felt his hair rising and couldn't stop his knees from shaking. The tormented cries of the lyre filled his skull and were much darker and more powerful than any lyre sound he ever heard. Every time he hit the frame of the lyre like a drum, made the satyr twitch to the beat. He didn't know the words, but the music that broke its way into his consciousness with the intensity of a sledgehammer started forming words in his overstimulated brain. Dead I am the one. Exterminating sun. Slamming through the teeth. Strangling the breeze. The intent was, and the picture transmitted by the music were so clear that his breath became labored and his teeth started hurting as if he was beaten. Dig through the ditches, and burn through the riches. I stab in the back of your jugular. Feeling his head becoming woozy, the satyr slowly kneeled down. He could only look up at the man towering over him, scarring the world with his music. Chapter 532. A little harsh? Cleobum was writhing in pain on the ground. Seth. The connection is finally back, Puffles called out to him. Mom, Tatzel exclaimed. Please, I give up. I already dispelled the illusion, the satyr cried with bulging eyes and twisting goat ears. Right, it was about time for the finale and to take his prize. Since he had won, his demonic ballad came to an end. This has truly widened my horizons. Hee, please take my panpipes, the satyr mumbled. He had tears in his eyes. Was Seth more talented than him? That wasn't the question. The satyr realized that skills didn't matter if the other just beat the crap out of him. His music had been beautiful, but vain, and empty without any power. Why would I take your pipes? No, 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 I'm taking your most valuable possession, as per our agreement, the demonic bard said with a cold smile as he crouched down beside him. What do you think of becoming an instrument yourself? Wouldn't that greatly further your horizon? He asked as he grasped the satyr's head. He didn't have a lot of chances to get his hands on classes that were not combat-oriented. After all, he could hardly go around town and harvest the citizens of Delta. That was why the satyr's soul was very enticing. Relax, you are just paying your due. The minstrel's face paled. The blacksmith's gleeful smile seemed almost demonic. Wait. What do you mean? Cleobum's words cut off as Seth harvested his souls with the help of the Wraith Guard. Soul of Cleobum, the minstrel, big, rare, ego, crafting material. The soul of a wandering minstrel that used musical skills and illusion arts to rob unsuspecting wanderers. It has a good affinity with nature and great skills in illusion magic and music. If he got his hand on more souls like this, wouldn't he be able to make a whole band for himself? Cinema Dimension. Apollo didn't look so good and gave the three tricksters an angry look. I knew you were crafty, Hephaestus, and I did not expect any better from someone like Seth, but even you, Hades, he asked crestfallen. They had tricked him. I have no idea what you are talking about. Hades shrugged his shoulders remorseless. Persephone beside him couldn't help but chuckle. Her husband didn't often get the chance to show his playful side. You deliberately hid the fact that he was also a bard. Apollo accused, feeling wronged. Brother, it was meant as a surprise. The messenger god tried to calm him. Even you, brother, the god of sunlight asked exasperated. Oh, come in, Apollo. Don't act like you are upset. I saw you grinning when he used music to take apart the satyr. You liked the performance. Hephaestus teased him with a mischievous smile that could not be hidden by his voluminous beard. Apollo had an inherent sympathy toward musicians, and he never liked the guts of satyrs who had a habit of challenging the skills of the god of music. This and that is totally different. Apollo pouted. If he was honest, he couldn't say he hated little blacksmith's guts. Although he was a little too mild for the god's taste. After all the other three had shown him, he had actually grown some liking for him. Seeing him be talented in music, even if it wasn't the one he preferred, was just the icing on the cake. But even if they didn't lie, they had definitely hoodwinked him, and there was no way he could admit that he liked the blacksmith at this point. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of praising their favorite after what they did. He had wanted to give the blacksmith a challenge and watch him suffer to try and learn an instrument or singing. Now Apollo realized that they had led him by the nose, to make the challenge easy because their little champion already knew music. Most importantly, they had made a bet. Apollo was confident of winning against a blacksmith, even if he had a bunch of weird golems. Even if he knew magic. But seeing him perform music shook this confidence. The god of sunlight was sulky, but there was nothing he could do at this point. Knowing they had planned all this made it just more aggravating. Be our brother. Hermes tried to talk to him. No, I'm not in the mood to talk now. Especially not with you. Even you kept it a secret. The messenger god looked a little guilty, but he simply couldn't hide his smile. He was serious, but couldn't help starting to laugh in the end. I'm sorry, brother. But your expression when the blacksmith started to belt out in song was just priceless, the young man chuckled. The blacksmith god and desert god joined him. It really has been ages since I saw you like that, Hephaestus added. Persephone also chuckled, but for a different reason. The others may have thought Hades stayed calm, but his beard was not enough to hide his smile from his wife. One might have thought Apollo would feel shamed, but after listening to their merry laughter for a while, he finally joined it himself. It didn't happen often that they played such innocence prank on each other, and he realized that this wasn't so bad. Bet or not, this was all entertainment. He would gain nothing by acting all grumpy. The god decided to enjoy their peaceful get-together instead. He pulled Hermes in his arms and furiously rubbed his golden locked head in revenge. Ugh, brother. This is your punishment for lying to your big brother, he laughed. Seth and Hephaestus couldn't help but let out a small sigh of relief that Apollo actually ended up appreciating their prank. Things could also have gone the other way around. Not all Olympians were mature enough to take a good-natured joke for what it was. The rest of the cinema, the hidden figures in the rows behind them, were creeped out to see Olympians laugh together in harmony. It was very counterintuitive. Wasn't that a little harsh? Ceres cawed, landing beside him. Beating him and taking his soul on top. Are you going to put it into his own panpipes? You start reminding me of Forgebrand. The bird asked, slightly berating. Hey! Who asked him to live the life of a robber? It's even stated in the description of his soul. How passionately do you have to be about robbing people, that it becomes part of the information on your soul? Seth justified his loot and packed up the satyr's body, too. Fine, fine. I will follow from the sky again, the bird said, disinterested, and go back into the sky. Although he justified his actions, the bird's words made him ponder. Was it a little harsh to take someone's soul for trying to rob him in broad daylight? Back in the day, he would have just beaten the daylight out of the satyr. But what if he went back to robbing people afterward? That would have been his responsibility. Seth pondered about this for a moment, before storing away the soul and summoning Puffles. Let's hurry and get to dawn, he said, and mounted the nightmare centipede. It was a difficult topic to think about, and Seth made the executive decision not to think about it for now. It wasn't the time to be stuck in a moral dilemma. He could make the resolve to be a little more responsible about whose soul to take, next time. He was also cured from his weird fascination for the serene surroundings. There was no time to be squandered on dreamily viewing the landscape. Seth had no idea how Mina and the others were doing. The quicker he got this quest over with, the better it was. Seated on the mighty Ivyver's back, they cruised along the streets. Puffle's sharp, porcelain-like feet clattered on the pavement of the road, and they sped toward their destination. Within 2 hours, Seth and his bunch were able to see dawn in the distance. To not disturb any of the citizens, he, once again, made Puffles return to the pet space and walked the rest of the way on foot. Chapter 533. Dawn City. Dawn was a big city without a city wall. Like the light of dawn, many houses were built of sandstone with red, yellow, and purple hues. The outer residential areas were mostly comprised of one-story houses with thatched roofs. Only the shops along the main streets were slightly bigger. There were also guards at these major roads, but it wasn't a problem, as they didn't hold any big interest in Seth. He was easily able to enter the city. Towards the center, the buildings grew in size with colored tiles for roofs and were built from more precious stones like marble. The architecture overall seemed a lot more ancient than the medieval cities he visited on his travel. The streets were bustling with people who led their lives in peace. Most faces bore smiles as they pursued their work. It fit well with the myth that Hyperborea was a kind of utopia. To Seth, it felt like he had traveled to another time. It was one thing to witness that meshed with fantasy movies, novels, and games like he did on his journey to Aura and in Krina. This was completely different. The closest thing he had seen were the temples of the Olympian gods in Krina. Still, facing a completely new culture felt intriguing and a little confusing. In other places, he would have looked for the Adventure Guild to get information. But that didn't exist here. Without the advice from the village elder, he would not have known what to do. He asked his way towards the temple, and all the passers-by he asked, actually answered him friendly and patiently. With their advice, he quickly found the temple. Well, it was the biggest building in the center of the city, so it wasn't hard to reach once he knew where he was going. Still, the streets of such a naturally grown city were labyrinthine, and he appreciated the advice of the locals when he lost his way. It was early evening when he finally entered the big temple. The heavy oak gates, covered in decorative carvings, stood wide open, welcoming all visitors. The middle of the temples was occupied by a wide basin of water. At its end stood a tall statue of Apollo riding his chariot. An almost 8-meter-tall masterpiece carved from a smooth white stone. The detailed carvings and metal inlays of the statue bore witness to immense craftsmanship. It was so lifelike, that Seth was almost afraid it would start moving and scold him. After his experience in Krna, he knew this was no unfounded fear. Following the village chief's instruction, the blacksmith started looking for one of the priests. Sitting around the basin and peacefully playing music, were a lot of musicians. They were staring in the distance, lost in thought. Before he could find a priest, one of them approached Seth. "How may I help you?" he asked friendly with a soft voice. From the village elder, he knew that some of these musicians were actually priests of Apollo, like the man in front of him. "I'm looking for information on Scorpio," Seth stated, and explained the task given to him by Apollo to the priest. "Subduing the scorpion that defeated Orion. That is quite the task. Please wait for a moment. I will have to talk to some people." Looking after the priest leaving, Seth sighed and sat down. It couldn't be helped. He would have to wait for now. He used the chance to eat a meal. He watched the surroundings. All these musicians sitting around with unfocused gazes. Some were practicing their instruments, others played together music together. Many of them were alone, standing around or sitting at the basin as if waiting for the muses to bless them. It was very different from the scenes at the College of Demonic Bards. Especially the kind of music they made. The blacksmith had to admit that he didn't only have a talent for demon music, but also a preference. Waiting wasn't hard, but listening to their music was almost aggravating. It made him once again think about how he might have been a little harsh when taking the satyr's soul. Mostly because he was tempted to take all of theirs to have some peace and quiet. "I'm back. I'm sorry that I took a little longer," the young master of Lady Eos and many of the resources abound by the search, the priest apologized to him. "I talked to some of our wandering minstrels and bards. According to them, there were rumors from both day and dusk, about events in the Garden of Apollo," he began. The priest talked of beasts from further in the center of this sacred forest being displaced, making the outer rim more dangerous. Reports from hunters finding the carcasses of big beasts mutilated and cut in half. Swathes of destruction all over the place. "These are the only changes I was able to find in the recent time. In my opinion, Scorpion probably appeared at the center of the sacred forest." Ugh, why did it have to be another forest? Seth thought to himself. "Where is this sacred forest?" he asked out loud. "It's between day and dusk. The quickest way to find it would be if you leave dawn and follow the street southwest from here to reach day. The forest is west of day," the priest explained. "I seemed that they were only a few paved roads on the island and they connected the 3 major cities. He couldn't get lost as long as he stayed on the paved roads." He thanked the priest and left the temple. He doubted he would get any better clue anywhere in the city. If it ended up not being the sacred forest, he would, at last, be close to day and dusk, where he could visit the temples for more info. "Follow the yellow cobblestone road, Seth," he joked to himself when he stepped on the road leading to day. "Phew, you are finally back." Ceres greeted him as the bird landed beside him outside of the city. "You know, I do like flying, but it becomes a little boring to stare down at a city full of happy people," the elemental complained. "Are you really wishing for their misfortune, just because you are bored? And someone like that dares to scold me for punishing a robber," the blacksmith said sarcastically. I didn't mean it like that," it cried out indignantly. Yet, Seth said with a grin and called out Puffles. "Let's continue this road trip. Maybe we can reach that forest before nightfall." "Challenge accepted," the Ivisor answered. The blacksmith almost fell off the centipede's back, when it suddenly accelerated like a race car. "Wouldn't we be faster if we cut through the landscape to get there instead of following the road?" Puffles asked curiously. The Ivisor was not wrong. Surrounding the neat road was mostly flat open land. Grassland, fields, and some forest. Maybe there was a small village somewhere off in the far distance. Nothing that would stop them from taking a shortcut. Despite all that, it made Seth suspicious. It wasn't big, but he felt an aversion to leaving the road. I can't explain it, but I would prefer to use the road. Although Puffles seemed unconvinced, he didn't object. But it wasn't like Seth himself was convinced. It was then that he remembered one of the functions of the Cloak of Hecate. He had only really used this feature back in the stronghold. Putting the hood deep in his face, his view was completely obstructed. However, in the darkness of the hood he saw small stars, like in the night sky. Some were brighter than other and some were dimmer than most. The bright stars gave an indication of the direction he should to reach the goal he was looking for. Thinking of Apollo's sacred forest, he turned his head left and right. Most stars dimmed when looking to the side of the road, straight down the road was the brightest. The cloak supported his gut feeling that staying on the road was the best way to his goal. He now felt a lot more confident in his decision, even if he didn't know what exactly was lurking in this peaceful landscape that would hinder their travel. Maybe more illusion-wielding satyrs. We stay on the road. Seth reinforced his decision by screaming it into the airstream. No need to scream, we have telepathy. Sorry, I forgot. Chapter 534. Once again. Once again, after a while, a figure appeared on the road. It was a giant of a man, but so ugly only a mother could love him. He had swine-like features, crooked teeth, and a dull smile that made him look stupid. It was about to become even more stupid when the giant centipede was running at him at full speed and only came to a halt a few meters before him. As shocked as he was, it didn't take long for the meat mountain to regain his composure. His face warped into an even uglier, sadistic smile. Seth quickly assessed the situation. Although the road was clean, he smelled blood in the air. This situation seemed familiar. He had just spotted the gut-wrenching sight of an oak tree covered in severed heads when the beast introduced itself. Traveler. I am Orbis, the mighty. I challenge you to a match. Best me in a competition of fist, speed, or wrestling or I won't let you pass, he bellowed confidently. Was this guy even sane? Didn't he see what Seth was riding on? Why would he accept a duel, especially when he had an inkling of what happened to the losers? The blacksmith had to admit that Orbis had guts, or he had maxed out his delusion attribute. No matter what it was, he had made a mistake. Maybe the worst of the determinately short rest of his life. It wasn't picking a fight with Seth. He had introduced himself. The audacity! There is only one mighty in this world. It is I, Puffles, the mighty. The telepathic outrage echoed across the land, making Orbis stumble back and almost fall. The nightmare centipede's massive head shot out before the brute had a chance to realize what was going on. A crunch, a splash, and a headless body fell to the ground. It went so fast, even Seth only realized what the eye-visor was about to do, the moment it happened. The blacksmith felt no sympathy for the murderous highwayman. He had suffered the same fate as his victims, though it was debatable what was worse. Having your head severed and hung on a tree or having it bitten off and digested by a giant insect. Seth could only shrug his shoulder, he didn't know the answer to that. Before the blacksmith continued, he did two things. One was to collect the soul Orbis had dropped after his violent death. Competitive soul, medium, uncommon, crafting material. The soul of a competitive person. All physical attributes will slightly increase in a duel or competition 1v1. The man was nothing to be admired, but his soul was quite interesting and Seth decided to put it to good use. After collecting his spoils, he went over to the tree. It fit one of the myths of Apollo. On the tree hang many heads. The bodies of their owners were strewn over the ground in the small thicket behind it. The bodies of travelers and merchants. There were even horses and carts hidden between the trees. There was not a lot the blacksmith could do for them. He didn't have the time to bury them, or the space to collect their corpses. He freed the animals and set their bodies and the oak tree on fire. At least their bodies wouldn't be eaten by wild animals this way. He waited for the pale blue flame to do its work and buried the ashes of the bodies and the oak using earth magic. It was the best he could do with his limited time. When he mounted Puffles again, he halted for just a moment, before also burning the body of Orbis. Ding! Title, Civil gained. You have shown basic decency, even towards an enemy. What? He exclaimed, seeing he had gotten a title for burning and burying corpses. He didn't quite know what it meant and the title didn't have any effect. Maybe he would ask Simon or the princess about it later if he remembered. Well, That was anticlimactic, Seth commented dryly. You know, if you already lay these little games, you should at least make them a little harder. The god of destruction and chaos mocked Apollo. At this point, it was clear that the god of sunlight had tweaked a few things to test the little blacksmith. Apollo didn't seem fazed by the criticism. It was still kind of fun. Hermes still supported Apollo. Yeah, but what was with that title? Apollo wasn't hung up on missing out on watching a fist fight. He was asking the real questions. A bunch of Olympian heads turned to look at a hooded figure who was sitting in the row behind them. What? The system god asked disinterestedly. The gods kept staring at him as he shoved a handful of popcorn into the darkness under his hood. It was on a whim, okay? Stop staring. Don't you people see it as barbaric and an offense to the gods, to not bury a body even if it's an enemy? Of course, after interacting with many worlds, they didn't judge anyone for following customs they didn't know. Still, despite having long left behind any notion of enforcing such laws on worlds they didn't control, they appreciated the system gods thought to commemorate following them. Well, it's also a funny contrast to his title as a burning savage, Hephaestus pondered. The other gods all had expressions of so that was the reason, while the blacksmith god could feel a piercing glare from behind, drilling into the back of his skull. Did he expose something he shouldn't have? Maybe it would have been better to stay silent. The city of day was built similar to the city of dawn. The only exception was that the houses in this place were built mostly from yellow sandstone and other brighter stone. Since he was already here, Seth once again visited the temple. This time it wasn't filled with musicians looking for inspiration. The people sitting around with empty eyes and empty pieces of paper in their hands were poets and writers. This time the blacksmith was approached by an old man. Again he stated his business and again he was left to wait. At least poets were mostly silent or just quietly mumbling during their practice. The priest came back a few minutes later. According to him, the unrest in the garden of Apollo had already calmed. What did this mean? Did Scorpio settle down? Or did it leave the forest? Slightly annoyed, the blacksmith thanked the priest and left. He would still have to explore the forest to make sure, but not today. The night was falling, and Seth was tired. So he decided to stay in the city. Sitting alone in the dining area of the pub/inn, he stared down at the table full of delicious-smelling food. The sight and smell of these exotic dishes made his mouth water. The food was really good and the ale also tasted great, but something was missing. The room around was rowdy with happy people eating and drinking, but Seth felt a bothering silence. Right, there were no Finn or Mina or any of the others. Solitude had never bothered him, but somehow, over the past 2 years, he had gotten used to not being alone. And he wasn't just being alone. The hustle and bustle of his life were somewhere out there and possibly in terrible danger. What if something happened to them while he was stuck here? Mom? Are you okay? Tatzel asked meekly. What? Yeah, of course, he chugged the tankard of ale as if to prove to the worried snakelet that everything was fine. Don't force it. It's okay. We will find that thing tomorrow and return post-haste. The Visor. Right, it's just. I won't be able to share this with Mina or compete over it with Finn. Why not, just bring some along and share it with them, when we return. Puffles stated the obvious solution. You are right. Let's do that, Seth said in a better mood. He was a lot happier thinking about what to do when they reunited than worrying about the alternative. He ordered a lot more and packed most of it in his inventory for later before going to his room for some sleep. Chapter 535. Arrival. Sigma. The armored school bus weaved through the empty skyscrapers of the abandoned city. They had to fly low to see the streets as the city was immersed in darkness. From their flying vehicle, they were able to see many kinds of roughly human-sized monsters on the streets, though their silhouettes were hard to make out in the darkness when the sunlight didn't reach. The few of them that had night vision or an item with the effect were not much better off. Something was actively obstructing their range of view. Almost like a dark fog. Yvette felt like they were in a submarine, exploring the ruins of a lost civilization on the bottom of the ocean. These varied and alien beasts they could see roaming the streets reminded her of those macabre deep-sea creatures she heard about. My lady, I can see signs of magic wards, the hooded figure suddenly announced. Lixis squinted her eyes and stared at the place the hooded figure was pointing at. Right, I can also feel traces of elaborate magic on the walls of this building, she concluded after a moment. Whatever kinds of skills the hooded man had, they were better than those of Lixis. Although she had a high level, she realized that she would have to put more emphasis on honing her own skills in the future. From then on, the magic-savvy members knew what to look out for, and they found a few more traces of broken spells and wards. They gave them a rough direction to follow, which coincided with the directions of Lena's skill to locate a subordinate. Everything led them towards the center of Sigma. As they got closer, something big came into view. Could Cade be in there? Mike asked Lena, nodding ahead of them. Yes, the direction is right. Cade has to be here, the princess answered with a nod. Ahead of them, they saw a luminous dome of light from afar. A product of a high level of magic knowledge none of them would have expected to find on Earth, in a place outside of the influence of Krishna. It was a mighty shield protecting the very center of the district. However, it was flickering. They are under attack, the hood concluded, certain of his presumption. As they got closer, the others realized why he said that. There were flashes of magic and sparks of weapons clashing against each other in armor, at the foot of the glowing hemisphere. It is a crowd of beasts ranging between Leave 60 and Leave 80 besieging a small group of strong warriors, the hood updated them. Of the current members, he could see the furthest. At this point, he just informed all of them, instead of speaking to Lena first. Your Highness, there are two existences at the zenith fighting each other, he directed at the princess. The other team members didn't understand what he meant by the zenith. But they didn't need to know, to soon see who he meant. There were two people on the ground fighting an especially flashy and devastating battle. A man with a silver aura, wielding a long slender sword, and a woman with a crimson aura holding an imposing glaive were clashing amidst the monsters. The pure shock waves when their weapons clashed against each other turned the surrounding beasts to mush and peeled the siding off the nearby buildings, exposing the steel reinforcements below. Should I interfere? The hood asked his mistress. No, we don't know who belongs to which side. Mike, do you think you can fly us into the bubble? Cade is somewhere in there, I am sure. What about this fight? Are you sure we shouldn't help? Wasn't your goal to get in contact with the people of Sigma? The Catman asked to make sure. If she demanded them to throw themselves into this kind of battle, he would have to refuse her. Seth had rubbed off on the team leader, who now thought of the lives of his people first, not minding any missions or duties. No, we don't know enough. If we just interfere, we might cause more harm than good. Let's try to get in there first, find Cade, and try to collect some information. Hearing her thoughtful answer, Mike nodded. He could agree with this plan. Especially since the sun was already sinking. It would be safer to spend the night in a faltering defensive barrier than defenseless in this city. As he steered the shuttle toward the glowing border of the dome, he throttled their speed in case the dome was a solid obstacle. Although he didn't know a lot about all kinds of barriers, but it was enough to not risk smashing their vehicle on one. They gently bumped into the membrane at first, but before they could start their next try, a hole just the size of the bus opened before them and they could slip into the safety of the dome. Someone had opened a door for them. Hidden by the light of the barrier before, they found the streets below filled with people. Not just the streets, but also the windows and roofs of the buildings to the side were bustling with people looking up to the flying school bus turned armored shuttle. Not even the hood was able to say that this didn't feel awkward. Tens of thousands, maybe even millions of eyes were following them. And they were following Lena's directions. The closer she was to Cade, the clearer she was about her location. Followed by the innumerable eyes of the crowd, the shuttle took course towards a big building close to the center of the dome. That's the police headquarters, Yvette exclaimed, recognizing the building at first glance. It wasn't just the sign that said Police of Sigma in big fat letters, but the fact that all of these were built the same, so people could easily recognize them in any district. Do you think she was arrested? Bulko asked innocently. In this situation? I bet they are using it as an organizational base. Lena answered the question. She had been the governor of Delta long enough to know one or two things about the way districts were built and planned out. She would have also chosen this location in this kind of situation. Mike slowly decreased their height and followed Yvette's instructions to land at the heliport on the roof of the building. They had just landed when the door to the roof opened and a group of people assembled beside the heliport. What do you think? Mike asked the princess. I think Yvette, Hood, and I should go and speak with them. You guys should stay here and protect the shuttle. Mike thought a moment about her suggestion before he agreed. Her guard seemed strong enough to protect them and Yvette was from Earth, she knew their culture best. While Yule Cat's fur waited in the shuttle, the group around Lena exited the bus and approached the group of warriors that had assembled on the roof. Greeting, I am Lena of Krishna. a representative of the Krna Empire in Delta. She was oozing with dignity as she introduced herself. It was enough to make the other people speechless. The man at their front needed a moment and cleared his throat before he answered. My name is Silas Heasing, captain of Sigma's defense force. If you allow me the question, are you the lady that Ms. Albright told us about? He followed up his introduction with a question. Is she okay? Hearing Kate's name, Lena immediately had to ask how she was doing. Yes, Ms. Albright is doing fine. After she introduced herself as a messenger from Delta, we welcomed her as a guest, Heasing explained with a kind smile. It seemed Lena's worry had gotten her some point with him. The princess sighed in relief as felt a heavy weight lift from her heart. Kate was here and she was okay. At least someone had survived. Would you like to come in and meet her? Although is not the best situation for Sigma, I believe there is a lot to talk about. Maybe over a cup of tea. Heasing invited her. Before they entered the door, Heasing turned back and looked at the bus. Is it okay to leave your vehicle here? He asked the princess. Oh, yes. Don't worry. It can protect itself, she answered with a smile before urging the men to lead the way. Chapter 536. Seth's Lullaby. Q. 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 Seth was speechless. This was not what he had expected. They had set off from day early in the morning and entered the Garden of Apollo, an expansive forest. Seated on Puffle's back, the blacksmith was able to get an overview of the damage. As the report stated, there were large swathes of destruction with broken trees and deep ditches crisscrossing through the forest. They followed the signs of destruction all the way to the center, but they led even further and out the other side of the forest. There they finally found Scorpio. It was a huge black scorpion roughly the size of a cow. Its shell was smooth and polished black like granite. It had two huge, sparkly eyes, with much smaller ones surrounding them in a pattern. Overall, it had nothing in common with the critters Seth knew. It looked almost cute. It was like those tiny spiders from the internet. Q. 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 As the blacksmith entered the scene, it had its round claws and tail lifted over its head in a defensive position. On the other side was a beast of a man. Easily 4 meters tall. He kept rapidly firing arrows at the smaller scorpion. Every time an arrow hit, it would exclaim AQ. The arrows on the other hand just glanced off, with a force that cut into the landscape. This explained what happened to the forest. However, Seth didn't really have the capacity to think about that right now. The situation was already hard enough to understand. Not only was there someone trying to steal his target, but the beast he came to slay was not what he expected. The blacksmith had been more than ready to wail on a giant monstrous scorpion. The bard had prepared to play his destructive tunes to grind the monster to dust. But how could he possibly do this to such an adorable fellow? It reminded him of small Puffles. Adorable? I was never adorable and I never looked anything like this arachnid pup. I was always magnificent, the Ivisor called out indignantly. What was he supposed to do now? He suddenly felt bad thinking of committing the atrocities he planned on that little scorpion. And there was also this guy actively messing with his quest. Orion Leave 85. The man was so preoccupied that he did not even notice Seth using observation on him. Let's land first, Seth decided, and the Ivisor slowly descended. Zap him if he tries anything, he instructed Ceres in the sky. A good zap from the elemental would knock him out, but not kill him. Probably. Aha, another abominable creature has come. Are you here to help your brethren? Do not think you can beat one of the line of Orion with numbers, the braggart laughed confidently, leaving Seth speechless. How was the current Puffle similar in any way, shape, or form, to that pitiful scorpion that had a hard time enduring the volley of arrows? Die! I sounded from the sky. When Orion suddenly pointed his bow at the Ivisor, a bolt of lightning struck him from above. Twitching, he let go of his weapon, bow, and arrow fell to the ground. Zeus? Why would Zeus interfere in my glorious revenge? He mumbled, looking up at the lightning-wielding eagle above. It seemed that he had mistaken Ceres for Zeus in his eagle shape. The misunderstanding did not hold for long. Ugh, no. You are an automaton, like those of the lame one's design. Why does Uncle interfere? He mumbled before Seth could capitalize on his mistake. Hey, that design is original, the blacksmith scolded from atop the Ivisor. Who are you to interrupt my righteous revenge? Curses, it got away again, Orion exclaimed. He had been focused on the giant man. When Orion mentioned it, Seth realized that the scorpion had run away without him noticing. It's extremely quick. No wonder half the forest is decimated. This dud must have hunted it for days and all across the landscape, Puffles commented disdainfully. This is your fault, Orion stated aggravated. It seemed he had already recovered from the lightning strike. My fault? I am here on a quest from Apollo to subdue the scorpion. What the heck are you doing, getting in my way, the bard spat back. I do not care. This is the beast that killed my ancestor Orion and I will have its head, he proclaimed before running off at breakneck speed. This little. Not only didn't he listen at all, but he was also wasting Seth's precious time. But not everything was bad. As Seth and Puffles followed the duo in their comical hunt, the blacksmith realized a pattern. Thanks to the bowstring snapping during Ceres' attack, the hunter was now forced to try and catch the arachnid. Every time Orion came too close, the scorpion would run away in a random direction at a speed impossible to keep up with. But it would also stop after some time and wait. Before he had been shooting at the scorpion from outside this range, and it had been Seth and the eye visor that had stepped into the scorpion's zone, prompting it to flee. Without his bow, Orion was forced to play this futile game of cat and mouse. The hunter was wasting Seth's time by constantly scaring away Scorpio. Zap him. Make sure he stays down for a while, Seth finally instructed Ceres in annoyance. He didn't want Orion to die. The bard knew only one lullaby and the guy might be quite helpful to him in his performance. Another lightning fell from the sky, but Orion managed to dodge the first and second strikes. However, the next 5 all hit their mark, rendering him unconscious. With the pursuer out cold, Scorpio stopped in its tracks, waiting warily. The name of the demon this song was for had been crossed out in the book, but it belonged to the kinds of ballads that called upon Paimon. Able to control and manipulate those that hear it. The bard had learned it mostly because it had no negative impact on the musician, and it was one of the few calm ones that he actually liked the lyrics. Since he didn't know the original name, he used channeling without any target, aiming it towards the void for anyone to pick up. With his talent for finding demonic sponsors, it might get picked up by the right person. The bard played a hauntingly soothing melody with ounce, as he sang in an unwanted soft voice. It was a slithering, manipulative force that followed his channel and poured into his music. Dark runes spawned from the lyre's strings and crept toward the scorpion. Sleep, my little Scorpio. Let your dreams take wing. One day when you're big and strong, you will be a king. As the demonic notes slowly seeped into the hard shell, the beast started swaying in sync with the melody. Its tail and claws slumped a little as it became drowsy. The melody started picking up speed. You've been exiled, persecuted, left alone with no defense. When I think of what that brute did, I get a little tense. The energy that flowed through him with channeling was stronger than expected. There was no will attached to it, no presence, but it kept giving him the inspiration to improve the song for his situation. Now dream a dream so pretty that you don't feel so depressed cause you are still so itty bitty and need a good night's rest. The scorpion had now completely stopped moving. Seth let go of Ounce, who kept playing the music while the bard stepped on Orion's back. He took hold of his arm. The sound of an enemy's dying gasp, their bodies squealing in my grasp. With a determined yank and gut-wrenching crunch, Seth dislocated the man's shoulder. Though unconscious, he let out a painful squeal. He had no intention to kill him, but his cry of pain was enough to weave seamlessly into the demonic melody. His family's mournful cry, that's my lullaby. He left the fleshly instrument behind and approached. With light steps, the bard came closer to the scorpion, and the number of demonic runes that seeped into the scorpion grew. The polished black shell started taking on a red tinge to it. Your master is gone, but I am still around, to love this little lad, he almost whispered to the giant scorpion. Till you learn to be a killer. With a lust for being bad. The lyre's play swelled on and became more chaotic and brutal. The melody of angry growls, a counterpoint of painful howls, a symphony of death. Oh my! That's my lullaby. In the short break, he took some distance and brought out his pets. Using telepathy, he prompted Puffles and Tatzel to join him in the song. Sleep, you little pest. I mean, precious little thing, the nightmare centipede corrected his Freudian slip. One day when you're big and strong, the emoji followed Seth's instructions. You will be a king. The pounding of the drums of war, the thrill of army's mighty roar. The joy of vengeance, the eye visor bellowed, testify, the snakelet cheered. I can hear the cheering, he prompted the two. Puffles, Scorpio, what a guy, Puffles was slightly annoyed. Tatzel, Scorpio. What a guy, Tatzel had fun singing along. And then our flag will fly against a blood-red sky, that's my lullaby. Ding! You have fulfilled the quest subduing Scorpio waiting for rewards. Chapter 537. One of the worst crimes. Be brother, calm down. Hermes held on to Apollo. The god of sunlight was displeased, to say the least. The little blacksmith had actually borrowed the power of a demon god to bind the little Scorpio to himself. Yes, he had only sent one of the constellation's offspring and maybe he had underestimated little Seth's skills. But he was angry now and there was no way he would admit it. Stay Apollo. Let's find a solution before you do something rash. Hades said imposingly. Seth did not speak up. He wasn't going to pick a fight at this juncture. It was better if he left it to the Olympians to speak. He's right. Apollo, you were the one who tried to make this quest hard on him. Hephaestus agreed. Making Scorpio's intent to flee, rather than to fight, would have made this hard on a lesser skilled bard. Though the blacksmith god had to admit that he had not expected this kind of move from the little skald. Subduing Scorpio was one thing, but to covet the possessions of a god for himself. They would need some time to iron this out. Oh no, what had he done? The crimson-colored Scorpio was calmly sleeping on the grass to the side. A testament to his crimes. Seth himself also was in a little panic, when he faced the result after the song had ended. He wasn't stupid. He knew that it was one of the worst crimes for Olympians to steal from them. Right after challenging their skills. It had been the music that had misled his actions. He had underestimated the extent of influence the channeled power had on him. Of course, he knew what the song was supposed to do. Putting others to sleep was secondary to making someone his ally, or slave depending on their resistance. He just hadn't thought that the song would even be able to do more than put a divine beast to sleep. Its resistance had been a lot weaker than he had expected. The bigger problem was, that it was not necessarily a lie that he coveted the scorpion. The song had brought about a result that he desired and he couldn't deny that. There was no way Apollo wouldn't be angry at him for this. There was a small turning hourglass beside the quest in his quest window and it felt like it was counting down to his destruction. Now he could only hope that the god of sunlight would show him mercy. Aren't you a little overly dramatic about this? You didn't break any rules, although I don't understand why you would want a pup like that when you have me and the scaly worm Puffles commented disdainfully. Hey! Don't call me that! But he is right, Mom. I'm sure you are overreacting. Tatzel partially agreed with the Ivisor. Ding! Please visit the Temple of Apollo in dawn to receive your quest rewards. Now he couldn't even just return today but had to cross the island and get back to dawn to receive his scolding. Oh, well. Puffles, grab Scorpio. We will take it along. What about that guy, Mom? The Imuji asked, poking Orion who was still lying on the ground. Arim, let's take him, too, he said, shrugging his shoulders. How's your mana looking, Puff? No problems here. With that, they set off. Checking with the robe of Hecate he made sure that it was okay to take the direct path, flying across the island straight towards the city of Dawn. The flying centipede held Scorpio and Orion in his claws as they cut across the island. Not following the road saved them a lot of time and they. Seth kept observing the ground nervously, but there was nothing suddenly erupting or anything that would attack him. Maybe they could have taken the direct route? The blacksmith shook his head. Even if there was nothing now, who knew what would have been there earlier? Ah! What is this? Let me go! Orion suddenly cried out. It seemed that the big guy had woken up. Stop struggling, you big baby! Or I tell Puffles to let you fall, Seth warned him using telepathy. Puffles, he laughed. What kind of name is Puffles Kaia? I'm sorry. It's a great name, he cried and hurriedly apologized in a high-pitched voice when one of the claws suddenly let go, giving him a taste of almost falling to his death. Where are you taking me? He called out pitifully. I don't know, yet. We are going to Dawn. I will get my reward or be scolded by a god. And after that, I will decide what to do with you. Dawn? I can't go back to Dawn. Drop he here, anything is better than Dawn. He was suddenly very agitated, almost panicky. What is there to fear in Dawn? The blacksmith asked intrigued. That is none of your business. I don't want to talk about it, it came back promptly. Then I will definitely bring you to Dawn, the bard taunted. No, I will talk, but don't bring me there, he begged. After a moment of silence, Orion seemed to have concluded that Seth agreed with him and started to talk. My mother and grandmother are in Dawn. They will terribly scold me for running off to take revenge, he whimpered at the thought of facing them. Seth couldn't help but suspect this might be the reason he had to return to Dawn. Even when there was no direct hint in the quest completion notice. They won't kill you. Aren't you exaggerating a little? You don't know them. This would be a fate worse than death, he pleaded. Great, I will bring you home then. The smile was audible in his telepathic message. No, the cry of despair echoed across the island, but Orion couldn't escape. Who would his parents be, if he was a descendant of Orion? It couldn't be Artemis. If this involved Apollo's sister, there would have definitely been a word about it. Was there any other relation Orion had? The Seth mused about the matter on their way back, as Orion kept struggling to escape, without any success. This time the blacksmith didn't bother hiding Puffles. He wouldn't drag the giant scorpion and the big man into the city himself. Instead, they aimed straight for the temple, where the Eye-Visor put down the scorpion and dropped off the tall dude into a courtyard to the side of the building. Orion landed rather, unfortunately, head first on the ground, leaving him moaning in pain. Seth jumped off and landed beside the two. As he expected, their arrival had not stayed unnoticed, but the reaction was a lot tamer than expected. Some people pointed at the Eye-Visor in awe, like it was a spectacle, but no panic or hysteria like Seth had thought. The priest/bard Seth had met the last time came running out of a door close by. His eyes wandered to the scorpion, once Puffles vanished. Then they looked at Seth before focusing on the man, laying on the ground behind him. "Why, young Master Orion," the priest exclaimed. "Oh, what a blessing! You have brought back the young master," he spoke happily to Seth, completely ignoring the burns, bruises, and dislocated shoulder his young master had suffered. "Arim, no need to thank me. Is he from some kind of wealthy family or something?" Seth's brain calculated. He had been occupied with his quest and the possibly unfortunate fate of his friends. That was why he had not seen this opportunity. The bard had planned to bring Orion back as punishment, but maybe he could get a finder's reward for the many children. The priest looked a little stumped at his question before he remembered that Seth was an outsider. "You could say he has an important lineage. Young Master Orion is a descendant of Eos, the goddess of dawn." Chapter 538. Quest Rewards. Seth had no idea who Eos was. Although he had put some effort into researching mythology, there were simply way too many minor gods affiliated with the Olympian mythology. He couldn't know them all. Does Lady Eos cherish this fine young man?" Seth asked diplomatically, pointing at the man he had messed up and dragged here. Finding out he was a descendant of a god was problematic, since he didn't know Eos' stance towards Orion. From what he knew, there were some very concerned parents among gods, but also some who didn't really care, even if it were their direct offspring. The priest's smile changed a little as if he knew Seth's reaction well. Maybe a little too well. "Do not worry. The lad's grandmother won't fault you. One time they had to beat the brat black and blue, from head to toe, to bring him back. Looking at him almost unscathed, she will probably reward you handsomely," the priest gossiped a little. It seemed that Orion often tried to ditch his duties and run off to find adventure. He was a menace known all across the island, as he tended to make more problems than he solved. Like many Olympian heroes, he had some commendable abilities, but also many flaws. The blacksmith entertained the man for some time, but at some point, he had to cut him off, as there were more pressing matters he had to take care of. As much as he would have liked to run from the consequences of his actions, he had to face Apollo. "How about you send someone to inform Lady Eos or Orion's mother that he is here? God Apollo is awaiting me." Seth finally ended their little chit-chat. Dragging the still sleeping scorpion behind him, Seth entered the temple of Apollo. When he stepped before the statue, a divine sound rang and the stammering, singing, and strumming bards scrambled to leave the temple, leaving Seth and Scorpio alone with the statues. Similar to how it happened in Krishna, the statue came to life. "You have fulfilled your quest," it stated a little grumpy, but not as displeased as Seth had feared. "Why yes, your holiness," the bard said devout and knelt on the ground. Apollo let out a sigh. "At least you know your mistake," he said as if he knew exactly what Seth thought and felt. As if he had watched and read his thoughts on the way back. "You know, that you can't keep Scorpio." Seth nodded hurriedly. He was clear that he couldn't possibly poach a divine beast from a god. He doubted the demonic runes would even hold for long. "You are not quite right. You can't imagine the kind of problem the power of the First Lady can cause. But first, let's conclude the quest as promised," the god stated. Holy light gathered in the statue's hands and a small ivory chest appeared in his hands. It was radiating with pure divine energy. Take this vessel. If you put the defiled items into it, they will be cleansed by the divine power I have deposited inside. Apollo explained and handed him the little chest. With a length of 40 centimeters, a width of 30 centimeters, and a height of 30 centimeters, it was just big enough for a stack of dragon scales to fit. Seth could barely contain his excitement. With this, he could finally cleanse the 7 dragon scales. Then he would have 7 legendary materials. What kind of effects would they hold? What kind of armor would he be able to make with them? It seems that you are satisfied with this reward. Now you will work with me to release the curse from Scorpio, he stated. The god lifted his finger and a ray of light shot into Seth's brain. It infused the knowledge of a song into his head. The blacksmith couldn't understand the words or the meaning, but the bard in him was confident that he would be able to sing it. What surprised him was, that this was a duet. You will sing it together with me, while I quicken Scorpio's growth, the god of music commanded. Seth didn't really have the option to say no. And don't use the voice of that brute for this, Apollo added. Seth immediately understood that the god meant voice of Seth. He nodded, and at Apollo's signal, he started to sing the unknowable song. He had never heard such a divine melody leave his mouth, and it didn't really fit his taste. As he sang, only supported by his bard skills and Orpheus's voice, golden runes he had never seen before generated in front of his mouth and sank into sleeping Scorpio's carapace. He was so occupied not messing up singing, that he didn't even notice when Apollo joined him. But when he noticed, he was already in the flow of music. Like when he sang the lullaby, he was pulled along by the music. He forgot the thought of messing up and simply sang. Small cracking noises joined their singing, and Seth could see shining cracks appearing on the indestructible shell of the scorpion. It started growing and molting. Scorpio had woken up. Swaying with the music, it slowly started to get out of its old shell. Leaving the carapace behind, the pristine scorpion now stood between him and the god. With the growing finale of the song, the golden runes grew in number and fused into the scorpion. Any trace of the reddish glow that was still clinging to the freshly molted scorpion disappeared. Once the divine beast was cleansed, it dissipated into small motes of light. Seth almost broke down when the song finally ended. He had not noticed in the process, but his mana and mental energy had been completely emptied. Despite the absolute exhaustion, he couldn't help but smile. He was unable to hear the notifications, but some of his musical skills had improved. Singing, Journeyman, had become Leave 4 and Orpheus' voice had finally reached Leave 8. Although he didn't understand the lyrics, his poetry, Apprentice, had also leveled to Leave 6. Well, done. Better than I expected, the god praised him. Take this as a sign of my acknowledgement. Ding. Title, Apollo proved gained. You were given Apollo's stamp of approval for your musical skills. Plus 10% effect on all music. Plus 15% to all music played on Y lyre. Ding. Your trait Olympian Myths has slightly strengthened. When he checked the trait, where only Hades and Hephaestus were previously present, was now Apollo added with a weak connection. Thank you very much, the blacksmith said, repeatedly bowing. You really remind me of someone. Apollo finally grinned, when he saw the blacksmith's eyes wander to the carapace on the ground. It was the shell of a divine beast that was immune to all weapons. What blacksmith wouldn't think of making an armor from such material? Although I cannot approve of what you did to Scorpio, you did so with your own skills. Since it would seem a little unfair to just take him away, you can have this shell, we created together, Apollo said magnanimously. It was also his unceremonious goodbye, as the statue lost all life soon after he finished speaking. Seth waited for a moment to make sure the god was really gone, then he ran up to the shell to check it with blacksmith's eyes. Carapace of conflation, special, crafting material. The shell of a divine beast that is inhibited by a conflation of divine and demonic powers. Usage requirement, Seth Smith. The rating was special, similar to the bones of Seth he had made with the meteoric iron. In Seth's mind, this meant this also had the potential to directly make legendary items. It was a jackpot comparable to the dragon scales. He realized that this meant, that he had finally, really finished this quest. All he had to do was find Yvette, and Yvette. She was with the others, and all of them were still somewhere close to Sigma. What if something happened to her? His materials would be lost. Right, he was done here. It wasn't the time to think about the carapace. The others were in danger, it was time to hurry back. Putting the shell in his inventory, Seth stormed out of the temple. only to face an imposing figure. A goddess in the flesh stood before him. Chapter 539. Eos. Before the blacksmith who rushed out of the temple stood a winged woman with a divine aura of crimson light, reminiscent of dawn. A voluminous mane of curly golden hair flowed over her shoulders. She wore a delicate toga made of thin, soft fabric that didn't leave much up to his imagination. Seth had to gulp when she gave him a beautiful smile. "Oh, my! Nobody told me you were such a handsome young lad." Her gaze was unmistakable when her delicate soft fingers grasped his chin. "Don't hide such a nice face behind this crude thing." When her fingers touched his well-groomed beard, it fizzled away to dust, leaving his face cleanly shaven. Seth was frozen in shock, as the smooth face of the goddess came close. He could feel her breath and smell the fragrance of roses from her. Just moments before her soft lips stole a kiss from him, the blacksmith's rough hands grabbed her subtle shoulders, stopping her from advancing. He had to swallow as her beautiful eyes looked at him questioning and a little wronged. I am sorry, but I have a girlfriend. Although we are quite open about stuff, I would have to talk with her first." Rejecting the goddess probably hurt him more than her. The regret he felt was almost unnatural. However, he was a man of principles. If he were to sleep with another woman, he would want to give Mina the chance to join. Also, his friends and materials were in danger. He didn't have the time. "Oh, what a shame. I don't really like to share," Eos mused. With a sudden motion, she got out of his hand and pressed her alluring body against him. How could he even tell how soft she was, through his armor? "Are you really sure?" she asked again, looking up at him with big, beautiful eyes. His breathing quickened, but if his desire was the unstoppable spear, then his resolve was the unbreakable shield. His spear could not gain the upper hand and the goddess easily read it from his eyes. What a shame, she repeated. "Then I will have to reward you in a different way." She finally took some distance from him, giving him room to breathe and calm down. "I would say it is far from the fun we could have, but take this blessing in exchange for bringing back Orion, that rascal," she finally said, and her light of dawn fell on the blacksmith's body. Ding! Title: Daybreaker gained. You were blessing by Eos, a goddess of dawn, plus 10% magic power, mana regeneration and health regeneration in the early hours of the day, from morning to noon. Ding! Your trait Olympian myths has slightly strengthened. When he checked, he found that Eos was now also added with a weak connection, the same as Apollo. "Well, then, I will hold you back no further." The goddess said her goodbye and left, dragging the struggling Orion behind her. With a flash, both vanished and only Orion's claw marks on the ground were left behind. Yes, I will leave now, too. Goodbye," Seth told the priest before getting on Puffle's back. The Iviser's mana was mostly depleted, so they travelled back to the village he first entered by road. By the time they reached the coast, the Nightmare Centipede's mana pool had filled again and they did a running start off the cliffs at the shore. Seth didn't know how long it had taken to reach Hyperborea, but he had spent almost 2 days on the island. He could only hurry back and hope Mina and the others were okay. Cinema Dimension. "That was very nice of you," Hephaestus said to Apollo when the god of music returned to the cinema dimension. He was sure that the god of sunlight had taken a liking to their little blacksmith. Apollo avoided the blacksmith's grinning gaze. "This was nothing special. It's only because you guys gave me the power to make Scorpio grow. Don't think I would have spared him if it wasn't for that," the god denied what Hephaestus tried to insinuate. However, it was too late. Everyone, even Hades, gave him a similar look that seemed to say, "Look at that guy playing hard to be pleased. Since you don't like him and the quest is over, you don't have to keep watching," a rough voice suddenly commented. Seth, the god, had spoken up. Although what he said seemed offensive, his grin was even wider than that of Hephaestus or Hermes. "Who said that I don't want to keep watching?" Apollo asked defensively. "I mean, if you intend to stay, don't you think there is something you should do?" the god of destruction asked, rubbing his thumb and index together. "You want me to pay?" the god of sunlight exclaimed, shocked. "You know, he is right. The quest is over," Seth left Hyperborea. "You are just another guest now." Hephaestus supported Seth. For a moment Apollo thought of kicking out Hermes and going back in his promise to pay his entrance fee. "Be brother," the messenger god looked up at him with big puppy eyes. Begrudgingly he paid divine power to the 3 patrons of Seth, to stay and keep watching from the cinema dimension. The 3 couldn't help but smile in satisfaction. They had caught another one and this one would even pay double for a freeloader. But what should we do about Eos? Hephaestus asked Hades after a moment. What about her? Seth asked cluelessly. Well, Eos has a minor problem with her infatuation with mortals. She had already blessed him. She might find him in the future, but I don't think there is any problem, Hades explained to Seth and also answered the blacksmith god's question. On another note, what's with that trait, Hephaestus? A deep voice came from behind. A cold shiver ran down the spine of the blacksmith god. The system god had leaned forward from behind and spoke right into his ear. His chuckle was wiped from his face. I have no idea what you mean, he tried to play dumb. I knew there was something up with that. First strike, the darkness in the tacky wizard robe said unimpressed. The system god knew that the craftsman god had tried to pull something with the trait, but for it to grow stronger with the blessing of Olympian gods. It wasn't completely against the rules he had set previously, so he couldn't just throw the guy out. Instead, he gave him a strike. If he did any more funny stuff, he could still kick him. What? Hephaestus wanted to argue but was interrupted by Seth. He's getting strikes. I was directly banned, he complained indignantly. You also directly broke the rules. What? Do you want to go back into solitary confinement? The system god countered. Seeing the god of chaos and destruction shrink back with a wince, the robe leaned back in his chair and shoved a hand into his popcorn bucket. Everyone's gaze returned to the screen, where the little blacksmith was on his way back to Sigma. Although the Scorpio quest was interesting, it did not quite live up to the build-up. With the number of preparations the little blacksmith had done, the gods were expecting a little more from Sigma. Chapter 540. Sister's Sorrow. Sigma. The heavy silver sword aimed for the shoulder. Ugh, she laboriously blocked and deflected it with her glaive. Despite doing her best in the deflection, she was thrown back by the impact. She could feel her power waning and the aura on her spear weakened. When had her brother become so strong? She felt so exhausted, they had been fighting for so long and he was still going strong. He should have come back to help them after gaining such strength. Anger once again welled up in her chest. He didn't just run away and left them behind. Vlad had abandoned them, abandoned her. He left them behind in that hell and lived a happy life founding a family. She couldn't help the hot tears that started streaming down her face. Even after gaining such strength, he had not spared a thought of helping them. He was having a wholesome life, while they had to suffer in the beyond. The sorrow fueled her wrath. The same thoughts kept going round and round in her head, ever since she found out that her brother was still alive and had fled to another world. Why should he be allowed to be happy, after kicking them away? He had led them, he had promised. He had abandoned his duty and his family just like that. The red aura flared up again as she once again clashed with her brother. Deflection his sword with a powerful flick, she stabbed for his throat but missed. Yet, even better than his power was his ability to run. Vlad had nimbly ducked away, evading the deadly blade. Even though they both were vampires, their weapons were specifically enchanted to be able to kill even their immortal race. The fight went on and Vlad slowly gained the upper hand again. Her emotion-fueled rush was powerful but short-lived. Soon she was kneeling in exhaustion. When he had the chance to strike her down, he stopped. Genny, he started. Don't call me like that, she barked. He had long lost the right to call her affectionately. Genevieve, you have to stop this madness. I do not wish to kill you, he said helplessly. What's with the sudden sympathy, Vlad? She spat out her brother's name as if it was the vilest discharge. She could see the pain in his face when she said his name like that. It might have been just a bit of petty little vengeance, but it made her feel a little better. On the flip side, it also deepened her sorrow. There was a time when she called his name with glee. You abandoned me. You abandoned us, she blamed him, more to remind herself, than him. That was right. That time was no more. He had thrown it away. They would have fought at his side until the end, but he decided to run away. Genevieve, I left to protect you all. Save your excuses. Strike me down while you can, because I will not give up until I drag you down to the same place we had to suffer these past decades, she told him and readied herself. When Vlad really lifted his sword, she used her chance. She had used his little sobby moment to recover enough to move again. With a swipe of her glaive, she rolled to the side and cleaved into Vlad's calf. The vampire let a pain-filled roar. But he was still standing, she had not managed to cut through. As his sword came down for her again, she had to leave the glaive to evade the strike. Things seemed hopeless, now that her brother was enraged. Genevieve barely managed to evade several strikes. She realized that she would be unable to finish this battle today, but she was not ready to die yet. With a quick roll, she grabbed her glaive from the ground, jumped to her feet, and ran. The horde of monsters she had brought as a distraction for Vlad's allies was not enough to slow her brother. Even if he still wouldn't kill her, after almost hacking off his foot, she probably wouldn't be lucky enough to keep all her appendages if he caught her. She did a few bites, where she sucked the blood of the abominations she had brought to regain her stamina. Nimbly, she started climbing and jumping up the high buildings of this place. She was afraid of losing her way in these labyrinthine streets. Instead, she tried to use the building themselves to lose him. Jumping from a roof and crashing through the glass facade of the next building to make him lose sight of her. Inside she used some doors, ignored some walls, crashing right through them, and went straight out of the building on the other side. The vampiress did this a few times, either leaving the building to another side or changing floors before exiting. She finally managed to gain some distance from her brother, who also got slower. She fathomed that he started to worry about his beloved home. They had already gotten quite far from the barrier. Vlad probably started doubting whether she was really running or just luring him away. Visible, but blocked by the dark fog of the beyond, the sun had already risen in the distance. Genevieve felt pathetic. After all her training and zeal, she had fought with him the whole night, only to run away in the end. Had it all been for naught? She tried hard to become strong, for her revenge and her family, but in the end, she couldn't catch up to her brother, who chose to abandon them and lead a calm life. She shook her head to chase away these thoughts. She just had to train harder for the next time. Facing what lay before her again, she suddenly saw a massive creature in the sky. Giant in size, with a head shaped like a scarab, 2 pairs of scythe-like appendages, and the giant body of a centipede fit the aesthetic standards of the beyond. But the golden head and the porcelain, pure white chitin armor with golden ornaments definitely didn't. What was this? Was that a man sitting on its back? She didn't have the time to mess with this. She turned around and wanted to run, but suddenly a condensed ray of light cut off her escape path, by literally severing the corner of the building in front of her. She could feel the terrifying heat even from afar. From this distance, she thought terrified. The corners of the cut-off section were still glowing red hot. If this had hit her, she would have disintegrated in a puff of smoke and dust. This was an unmistakable sign for her not to run. It didn't take long for the centipede to close in. The figure seated atop the beats was waving at her. She could see he was wearing a wide cloak, atop a golden robe, and it seemed like he also wore armor below the robe. No need to run. I mean you no harm. I just have some questions, she heard the voice of the young man from above. He jumped off his mount and slowly floated to the roof in front of her. She readied her glaive and watched him warily. How unlucky! Not only did her duel with her brother fail, but she had to run away. The moment she managed to gain some distance, she ran into a weird fellow. I'm looking for a few people who have a hard time following instructions. They are traveling in a flying armored school bus. Did you see it? What was this guy talking about? What was a skull base? Although she didn't understand all of his words, she understood enough to associate it with the armored thing that had entered the barrier during the night. There is a barrier at the center of this place. I saw it enter there. Can I leave now? She spoke quickly. Prompted by her words, the man suddenly looked off in the distance. Then he put the hood of his cloak over his head for a moment. Ah, it's that glowing ball, right? Thanks, he said after a moment. With the 3 pairs of bright blue eyes fixed on Genevieve, the giant centipede lowered enough for the man to get on his back. She didn't dare to move before these two were away. Genevieve, her brother exclaimed as he pulled himself up on the rooftop behind her. She regretted this indecisiveness as soon as she heard him. The stranger had taken too much of her time. You also seem to be in need of a little help, she heard the stranger say from behind.